There are moments in your life that divide everything into before and after. Moments so profound, so earth-shattering that you'll forever measure time by them. For some people, it's a birth, a death, a natural disaster. For me, it was standing in a sterile hospital corridor at 3:15 on a Friday afternoon. My back pressed against the cold wall because my legs had stopped supporting me properly. Clutching a manila folder that contained 3 pieces of paper that would obliterate everything I thought I knew about my life. My hands were shaking so violently that the papers rustled, creating a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet hallway. I could hear everything with painful clarity. The squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum floors, the distant beep of medical equipment, the low murmur of voices from behind closed doors, someone laughing at a nurse's station down the hall, the sound jarring and wrong because how could anyone be laughing when my entire world was ending? Tears were streaming down my face in hot, angry rivers, the kind of crying that starts deep in your chest and tears its way out. I wasn't sobbing. I was beyond sobbing. This was something else entirely. This was the sound of a woman breaking apart, molecule by molecule. My mascara, the waterproof kind I'd carefully applied that morning when I still lived in a different reality, was running in black streaks down my cheeks. I could taste it, bitter and chemical, mixing with the salt of my tears. The medical documents in my hands proved, in clinical black and white terminology, that my husband had given me something no wife should ever receive from the man who promised to love and cherish her. The man who had stood in front of 200 people and vowed to be faithful. The man who had looked into my eyes during our wedding ceremony and promised forsaking all others. The man I had trusted with my body, my heart, my entire future. Chlamydia trachomatis, that's what the lab report said. Positive. Confirmed on secondary testing. Those cold medical words that spelled out betrayal in a language designed to remove emotion from devastating news. My vision was blurred, partly from the tears that wouldn't stop falling, partly from the rage that was building inside me like a pressure cooker about to explode. I could feel it, hot and dangerous, coiling in my stomach, spreading through my chest, making my hands clench into fists that crumpled the edges of the papers I was holding. The fluorescent lights above me flickered slightly, one of them making that annoying buzzing sound that fluorescent lights make when they're about to burn out, casting harsh shadows on the white walls that seemed to be closing in on me. I remember thinking, in that moment of complete devastation, how appropriate it was that this was happening in such a cold, sterile place, because that's exactly how I felt. Cold, sterile, hollowed out, like someone had reached inside me and scooped out everything that made me human, leaving behind just an empty shell that looked like Sarah, but contained nothing of who I actually was. A doctor walked past me, barely glancing my way. Just another crying woman in a hospital. Nothing unusual, nothing worth stopping for. He had no idea that the woman slumped against that wall was holding evidence of her husband's infidelity. Evidence that her 8-year marriage was built on lies. Evidence that the man sleeping next to her every night, the man who knew her body better than anyone, had been sharing that same intimacy with someone else and had brought back a souvenir. And honestly, as devastating as that moment was, as world-ending as it felt to stand there with scientific proof of my husband's betrayal, that wasn't even the worst part. I know that sounds impossible. How could finding out your husband gave you a sexually transmitted infection not be the worst thing? How could there possibly be something more painful than that moment of absolute destruction? But trust me, what came after made that moment seem almost bearable in comparison. What happened 3 days later would take my pain and humiliation to levels I didn't even know existed. The worst part was what David did when I finally gathered the courage to confront him. When I'd spent 72 hours planning what to say, rehearsing in my head, preparing myself for his reaction. When I'd imagined every possible scenario, from genuine remorse to angry denial, and steeled myself to handle whatever came. What I got was something I had never, in my worst nightmares, imagined. The worst part was watching him laugh at me, actually laugh. Not a nervous laugh, not an uncomfortable chuckle, but a genuine, amused laugh, like I just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. His head tilted back, his mouth open, showing his teeth, that laugh that used to make me smile now making my blood run cold. He mocked me, humiliated me, and he did it in front of her. In front of the woman he'd been sleeping with behind my back. The woman who'd been the other half of his double life. The woman who was young and blonde and beautiful and everything I apparently wasn't anymore. She was standing right there beside him, her hand possessively on his arm like she had every right to touch him, like he belonged to her and not to me, the woman who'd actually married him. A smirk was playing at the corners of her perfectly glossed lips, her eyes sparkling with amusement at my pain. She was enjoying this, enjoying watching me fall apart, enjoying her victory over the pathetic wife who'd been stupid enough not to see what was happening right under her nose. David actually looked me in the eyes, with her standing there witnessing my humiliation, and made me feel like I was nothing. Like I was the problem. Like I was the joke. Like I was some pathetic, desperate woman who couldn't accept reality, who couldn't understand that she'd been replaced by someone younger, prettier, more exciting. He tilted his head in that condescending way I'd seen him use with people he considered beneath him. Colleagues who weren't as successful, waiters who got his order wrong, salespeople who annoyed him. That slight tilt that said you're not worth my full attention, but I'll indulge you for a moment. I'd never been on the receiving end of that gesture before. Now I was. Now I was one of the people David looked down on. And the words that came out of his mouth, the things he said to me in front of her, I'll never forget them as long as I live. They're burned into my memory, seared into my brain, the kind of words you can't unhear no matter how hard you try. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to take you back. I need you to understand the whole story from the very beginning. I need you to understand who I was before this happened, what my life looked like, how completely blindsided I was by everything that unfolded. Because this isn't just a story about betrayal. Though there's plenty of that. This isn't just about infidelity, though that's the catalyst for everything. This isn't even just about revenge, though believe me, there's plenty of that coming, and it's going to be so satisfying you'll want to stand up and cheer. This is a story about a woman who lost herself. A woman who was broken down piece by piece, systematically destroyed by the person who promised to protect her. A woman who had to decide, in her darkest moment, whether to stay broken or to rise up and fight back. A woman who discovered that she was so much stronger than she ever knew, and so much more dangerous than anyone ever suspected. Before I tell you how this all went down, before I take you through every painful, shocking, ultimately satisfying moment of this journey, before I reveal exactly what I did with those test results, and how I made both of them pay for what they did to me, I need you to do something for me. Smash that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because trust me, you're going to want to follow this journey until the very end. What happened after I got those test results, what I discovered about my husband's double life, the secrets I uncovered, the revenge I planned and executed with precision that surprised even me, it's going to blow your mind. So make sure you're subscribed, make sure you hit that notification bell, because you won't want to miss a single second of this. This is the kind of story that will stay with you long after it's over. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 34 years old, though I feel about 100 right now. I'm a third-grade teacher, or at least I was before everything fell apart. I don't know what I am anymore. Until 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect life. I genuinely, truly believed it. I thought I had the perfect marriage, the kind that other women envied when we walked into a room together. The kind where people would say, "You two are so lucky to have found each other." The kind that made single friends sigh wistfully and long-married friends nod approvingly. I thought I knew exactly who I was and where I was going. I had it all figured out. I had a plan, a life map. First comes love, then comes marriage, then comes the house in the suburbs, then come the children, then comes the white picket fence and the family vacations and the growing old together. I was right on track. Everything was going according to plan. Except it wasn't. None of it was real. I was living in a carefully constructed illusion, an elaborate play where I was the only one who didn't know I was performing. Everyone else knew their lines. Everyone else was in on the secret. I was the only fool who thought it was real. Funny how quickly everything you believe, everything you've built your entire adult life on, can shatter into a million pieces, isn't it? Funny how one moment, one conversation, one piece of paper can completely destroy the reality you thought you were living in. Funny how you can wake up one morning thinking you know your life, and go to bed that night realizing you never knew anything at all. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. Not to the affair, though that's obviously the catalyst that brought everything crashing down. Not to the test results, though those were the smoking gun that proved what I'd been too blind to see. Not even to the first lie, because I have no idea when that was. For all I know, the lies started before we even got married. No, I need to take you back to the very, very beginning. To when I was 26 years old and thought I'd found my fairy tale ending. When I was naive and trusting and so desperately in love that I couldn't see the red flags waving right in front of my face. When warning signs looked like romantic gestures and controlling behavior looked like protective care. I met David at a charity gala 8 years ago in what feels like a different lifetime. Actually, it was a different lifetime. The woman I was then doesn't exist anymore. She died in a hospital corridor holding test results, and someone else rose from her ashes. Someone harder, someone smarter, someone who wouldn't be fooled again. But back then, I was still her. Still Sarah, the elementary school teacher who believed in love and happy endings and the basic goodness of people. Still the girl who thought that if you were kind and loyal and devoted, those things would be returned to you. I almost didn't go to that gala. I remember that so clearly. It was a Friday evening in September, one of those early fall days where the weather can't decide if it's still summer or already autumn. I'd had a long, exhausting week at school. It was the third week of the new school year, and I was still getting to know my students, still establishing routines, still adjusting to being back in the classroom after summer break. All I wanted to do that Friday was go home, put on my softest pajamas, order Chinese food, and watch mindless TV until I fell asleep on the couch. That was my perfect evening. That's what I'd been looking forward to all week. But my best friend Rachel had other plans. She'd bought 2 tickets to this charity gala months in advance, expensive tickets that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. Her boyfriend Mark was supposed to go with her, but they'd had a big fight that week and broken up. Rachel was devastated, crying on my couch every evening, eating ice cream straight from the container, swearing off men forever. The day before the gala, she showed up at my apartment with the tickets and a desperate look in her eyes. "Please, Sarah," she begged. "I can't go alone. I can't face all those couples by myself. And the tickets were so expensive I can't just not go. Please, please, please come with me." I tried to say no. I really did. I explained that I was exhausted, that I had papers to grade, that I didn't have anything to wear to a fancy event, that I'd be terrible company. But Rachel was persistent, and I was the kind of person who had trouble saying no to the people I cared about. A character trait that would come back to haunt me in more ways than one. "I'll help you find something to wear," Rachel insisted. "We'll go shopping tomorrow morning. Come on, Sarah, when was the last time you did something fun? When was the last time you got dressed up and went out? You spend every weekend grading papers and planning lessons. You need a life outside of school." She wasn't wrong. I had become a bit of a hermit. Teaching consumed most of my time and energy. I loved it, don't get me wrong. I loved my students. I loved seeing them learn and grow. I loved being part of their development. But it didn't leave much room for anything else. So I agreed. Rachel squealed with delight, hugged me tight, and dragged me to the mall the next morning. We spent 3 hours trying on dresses in various stores. Most of them way out of my price range. Finally, in a boutique that was having a sale, I found a dress that was both beautiful and affordable. It was deep blue, fitted at the top with a flowing skirt, simple but elegant. With the sale discount, it was just barely within my budget. Rachel bought me a pair of silver heels to go with it, insisting it was a thank you gift for coming with her. I protested, but she wouldn't hear it. We went back to my apartment, and she helped me get ready, doing my makeup and hair like I was Cinderella being prepared for the ball. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked sophisticated, grown up, beautiful even. Rachel stood behind me, grinning at our reflection. "You look amazing," she said. "Some handsome guy is going to fall in love with you tonight. I can feel it." I laughed it off, told her she was being ridiculous. I wasn't going to this thing to meet men. I was going to support her, to keep her company, to make sure she didn't spend the evening crying in the bathroom over Mark. The event was at the Grandview Hotel, this beautiful historic building downtown with marble floors and ornate architecture. The ballroom was on the second floor, accessible by a grand staircase that made you feel like you should be wearing a ball gown from the 1800s. When we walked in, I stopped in the doorway, momentarily overwhelmed. The room was stunning. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light over everything. Round tables covered in white linens and elegant centerpieces filled the space. A string quartet played soft classical music in one corner. Well-dressed people stood in clusters, drinking champagne from crystal flutes. Laughing and chatting like this was just another Friday night for them. I felt immediately out of place. These weren't my people. I was a teacher making a teacher's salary, wearing a dress I'd bought on clearance, surrounded by people who probably spent more on their shoes than I made in a month. Rachel fit in better than I did. She worked in marketing, made decent money, was comfortable in these kinds of settings. I was the fish out of water. "Come on," Rachel said, linking her arm through mine. "Let's get a drink." We made our way to the bar, navigating through the crowd. I got a glass of white wine, something to hold more than anything else, something to do with my hands. Rachel got champagne and immediately started scanning the room, probably looking for people she knew. For the first hour, we mingled. Well, Rachel mingled. I mostly stood beside her, smiling politely, making small talk with strangers about the weather and the venue and the charity the gala was supporting. Some kind of children's hospital, I think. The details are fuzzy now. I was ready to leave by 9 o'clock. My feet hurt in Rachel's borrowed heels. My face hurt from smiling. I'd made enough small talk to last me a year. I suggested to Rachel that maybe we could call it a night. "Just one more hour," she pleaded. "Please, we paid for the whole event. We should at least stay for dinner." I sighed and agreed. 1 more hour. I could manage 1 more hour. I made my way back to the bar to get another glass of wine, figuring it might make the next hour more bearable. That's when he approached me. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere but here," a voice said from beside me. I turned to find a man standing there, leaning casually against the bar. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with dark hair styled perfectly, wearing a tailored navy suit that fit him like it had been made specifically for his body, which I later learned it had been. His eyes were dark brown, almost black in the dim lighting, and when he smiled at me, it was like I was the only person in the room. I felt my cheeks flush. "Is it that obvious?" I asked, trying to sound playful rather than pathetic. "Only to someone who feels the same way," he said, and I noticed his smile reached his eyes. It seemed genuine, warm. "These things are always the same, aren't they? A bunch of rich people drinking expensive wine and congratulating themselves for donating money to a worthy cause. Don't get me wrong, the cause is important, but the self-congratulation gets old." I laughed, genuinely laughed, for the first time all evening. I thought I was the only one who felt that way. "Definitely not," he extended his hand. "I'm David Mitchell." "Sarah Parker," I said, shaking his offered hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive, warm, and he held on just a second longer than necessary. Long enough to send a little thrill through me. "So, Sarah Parker, what brings you to this particular circle of hell?" I laughed again. I liked this man. I liked his honesty, his humor, his willingness to admit that these events were tedious. "My friend Rachel dragged me here. Her boyfriend was supposed to come, but they broke up and she didn't want to come alone." "Ah, the friend sacrifice. That's noble of you." He gestured to the bartender for 2 drinks, then looked at me. "What are you drinking?" "White wine, but you don't have to." "I insist. It's the least I can do for someone who's suffering through this for a friend." The bartender brought over 2 glasses of wine, and David handed one to me. "So, what do you do when you're not being dragged to charity galas, Sarah?" "I'm a teacher, 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary." I watched his face for the reaction I usually got. Sometimes it was condescension. Sometimes it was disinterest. Sometimes it was that patronizing, "Oh, that's nice," tone that implied teaching wasn't a real career. But David's face lit up. Actually lit up, his eyes brightening, his smile widening. "A teacher? That's incredible. You know, my third-grade teacher, Mrs. Henderson, she completely changed my life. I was struggling, had some learning difficulties they hadn't diagnosed yet, and she stayed after school with me 3 days a week for an entire year. She's the reason I made it through school. The reason I went to college. Teachers like her, like you make all the difference." I felt my heart melt a little. This handsome, successful-looking man was praising teachers, acknowledging how important they were. That was rare. "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched. "That means a lot. We don't hear that very often." "You should hear it more. What you do matters more than anything I do, that's for sure." "What do you do?" "Corporate finance. I work for Henderson and Associates. We handle investments for high-net-worth individuals and corporations. Basically, I help rich people get richer." He said it with a self-deprecating smile. Not exactly saving the world. "It sounds impressive, though." "It pays well, but impressive. I don't know, I push money around spreadsheets all day. You shape young minds, there's no comparison." We talked for the rest of the evening. I completely lost track of time, forgot about Rachel, forgot about the event, forgot about everything except this conversation with this charming, interesting man who seemed genuinely fascinated by everything I said. He asked questions about my students, about teaching methods, about the challenges in education. He told me about his work, making finance sound interesting even though I understood about half of what he was explaining. He made me laugh. He made me feel intelligent, interesting, valued. At some point, Rachel found us and gave me a knowing look, which I ignored. David was polite to her, included her in the conversation, but his attention kept coming back to me. I could feel it, that focus, that intensity. It was intoxicating. When the event finally ended around 11, David asked for my number. I gave it to him without hesitation, without playing coy, without pretending I wasn't interested. Because I was interested. More interested than I'd been in anyone in a long time. "Can I take you to dinner?" he asked. "A real dinner, not a stuffy charity event, somewhere we can actually talk." "I'd like that," I said, smiling up at him. "How's Tuesday? I know a great Italian place downtown, Russo's, unless you don't like Italian." "I love Italian." "Perfect, I'll pick you up at 7. I gave him my address, we said goodnight, and Rachel and I left. In the car on the way home, Rachel was practically bouncing in her seat. "Oh my God, Sarah, that guy was gorgeous, and he was totally into you. Did you see the way he was looking at you?" I tried to play it cool, but I couldn't stop smiling. "He seems nice." "Nice, he's perfect. Handsome, successful, charming, and he actually appreciates what you do for a living. Girl, if you don't marry that man, I will." We both laughed, but Rachel's words echoed in my head. Marriage? Was I really thinking about marriage after one conversation? That was ridiculous, premature, crazy. But I couldn't stop thinking about him. Over the weekend, I replayed our conversation in my head 100 times. I found myself smiling at random moments, remembering something funny he'd said. I checked my phone constantly, hoping he'd text or call, simultaneously terrified and excited for Tuesday to arrive. Monday at school dragged by. My students probably thought I was crazy because I kept getting distracted, losing my train of thought mid-sentence, staring off into space with a smile on my face. My colleague Jennifer noticed at lunch. "What's going on with you?" she asked, grinning. "You have this look on your face. Did something happen this weekend?" I told her about David, about the gala, about our date the next evening. She squealed, actually squealed in the teacher's lounge, making other teachers look over at us. "Finally," she said, "you've been single for way too long. It's about time you met someone." Tuesday took forever to arrive. I left school the moment I could, rushed home, and spent 2 hours getting ready. I tried on 6 different outfits before settling on a simple black dress that was casual enough for a dinner, but nice enough to show I'd made an effort. I did my makeup 3 times, convinced each time that I'd messed it up somehow. By 6:30, I was a nervous wreck. What if the conversation at the gala had been a fluke? What if we had nothing to talk about sober and in daylight? What if he'd changed his mind? At exactly 7 o'clock, my doorbell rang. He was punctual, I thought. That's a good sign. I opened the door to find David standing there in dark jeans and a button-down shirt, holding a small bouquet of sunflowers. I remembered you mentioned at the gala that sunflowers were your favorite, he said, offering them to me. I hope I remembered correctly. I was stunned. I'd mentioned that in passing, barely even a comment, and he'd remembered. He'd actually listened and remembered. You remembered, I said, taking the flowers, feeling tears prick my eyes. Thank you, they're beautiful. Not as beautiful as you, he said, and somehow he made the cheesy line sound genuine. Our first date was perfect. The restaurant was cozy and intimate, with dim lighting and candles on every table. We sat in a corner booth and talked for 3 hours straight. The food was delicious, though I barely tasted it because I was so focused on our conversation. David asked questions about my childhood, my family, my dreams. He told me about growing up in the suburbs, about his parents who were both doctors, about his younger brother who was a lawyer. He asked about my favorite books, my favorite movies, my favorite places I'd traveled. When he drove me home that night, he walked me to my door like a gentleman. He didn't try to kiss me, didn't try to come inside, just smiled and said, I had a wonderful time tonight, Sarah. Can I see you again? Yes, I said, probably too quickly, too eagerly, but I didn't care. I'd really like that. How about Saturday? There's a farmer's market downtown, and then we could get brunch. It sounded perfect. Casual, low pressure, during daylight so I could really see him, really get to know him. Our second date was even better than the first. We walked through the farmer's market, sampling cheeses and fresh bread, looking at handmade crafts, laughing at a street performer's terrible magic tricks. Then we had brunch at a cute cafe, sitting outside in the autumn sunshine, talking like we'd known each other for years instead of days. Our third date was the following Wednesday. David had somehow found out that one of my favorite bands was playing a small venue downtown and bought tickets. I'd mentioned the band once, in passing, during our first date. He'd remembered. Again. By our fourth date, I was falling. Hard. Faster than I'd ever fallen for anyone. David was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. He was attentive, remembering little details I mentioned. He was thoughtful, planning dates around things I enjoyed. He was affectionate without being pushy, holding my hand when we walked, putting his arm around me during the concert, kissing me gently at the end of each date. He texted me good morning every single day. He called me in the evenings just to hear about my day. He sent flowers to my classroom with notes that made me blush. My students thought it was the most romantic thing they'd ever seen. My friends loved him. Rachel thought he was perfect for me. Jennifer and Katie, my other close friends from school, agreed when they met him at a group dinner. He was charming without being smarmy, confident without being arrogant, successful without being pretentious. He remembered their names, asked them questions about themselves, treated them like people worth knowing rather than obstacles to spending time with me. My parents adored him from the moment I brought him home for Sunday dinner 2 months into our relationship. My mother practically glowed when she saw us together. She pulled me aside while David was helping my dad with something in the garage and squeezed my hands. He's wonderful, Sarah, she said, tears in her eyes. I'm so happy for you. This is the kind of man you deserve. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs I missed. The way David seemed almost too perfect, like he was playing a role. The way he mirrored my interests a little too perfectly, always liking exactly what I liked. The way he love-bombed me with attention and gifts and romantic gestures. The way he moved our relationship forward quickly, pushing for commitment before I'd fully thought through what I was doing. But at the time, I couldn't see any of it. I was completely swept up in the romance, in the fairy tale, in the validation that came from being chosen by someone like David. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. 2 years that, looking back now, I can't fully trust. Were they real? Were his feelings genuine? Or was I just a mark, someone he identified as suitable for the image he wanted to project? A nice girl with a respectable job who would make a good wife, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions, someone who could be molded into the perfect corporate spouse. I don't know. I'll probably never know. But at the time, those 2 years felt like the happiest of my life. David and I fell into a comfortable rhythm. We saw each other 3 or 4 times a week, more on weekends. We talked on the phone every day. We met each other's friends and families. We became a unit, that couple that everyone expects to get engaged, that everyone talks about as a sure thing. On the anniversary of our first date, 2 years after we met at that charity gala, David told me he was taking me back to Russo's, the restaurant where we'd had our first proper date. I thought it was sweet, romantic. A nice way to mark the occasion. I had no idea what he was planning. I got dressed in a new dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, did my hair and makeup with extra care. When David picked me up, he seemed nervous, which I thought was odd. David was never nervous, but I attributed it to the significance of the date, the weight of 2 years together, the unspoken question of where we were going. The restaurant looked exactly as I remembered it. Same cozy atmosphere, same candles on the tables, same intimate corner booth where we'd sat 2 years ago. David had requested the exact same table. I was touched by the gesture, the attention to detail. We ordered wine, appetizers, main courses. We talked about the past 2 years, reminiscing about favorite dates and funny moments. David seemed distracted, kept checking his watch, which wasn't like him. I started to worry that something was wrong. Then, just as we finished our entrees, David pushed back his chair and stood up. I looked at him, confused, thinking maybe he needed to use the restroom. Instead, he came around to my side of the table and got down on one knee. The entire restaurant went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward us. I felt my face flush with heat, my heart start pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was happening. This was really happening. David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Navy blue velvet, the kind that unmistakably holds a ring. When he opened it, I gasped. Inside was the most beautiful ring I'd ever seen. A diamond solitaire, simple but elegant, exactly what I would have chosen if I'd been picking it myself. He'd paid attention. He knew my style. He'd chosen perfectly. "Sarah Parker," he said, his voice clear and confident despite the audience we now had. "These past 2 years have been the happiest of my life. You make me want to be a better man. You make every day brighter, every challenge easier, every moment more meaningful just by being in it. I can't imagine my future without you in it. I don't want to imagine it. You're my best friend, my partner, my everything. Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down my face. Happy tears, joyful tears, tears of complete and utter bliss. This was the moment every little girl dreams about, isn't it? The moment when the man you love asks you to be his forever. The moment when your fairy tale becomes real. "Yes," I managed to choke out through my tears. "Yes, of course, yes." The restaurant erupted in applause. Strangers were cheering for us, clapping, some of them even crying along with me. David stood up, slipped the ring onto my finger where it fit perfectly because of course it did. He'd thought of everything, and kissed me while 200 people we'd never met celebrated our engagement. It was perfect. It was romantic. It was everything I'd ever imagined and more. It was also, though I didn't know it at the time, the beginning of the end. The moment when I sealed my fate, bound myself to a man I didn't actually know, committed my future to someone who was playing a role rather than being genuine. But I didn't know that yet. In that moment, with that ring on my finger and my future husband's arms around me, and an entire restaurant celebrating our love, I was the happiest I'd ever been in my life. David wanted a short engagement. When I suggested maybe waiting a year to plan the wedding properly, to save money, to give ourselves time to prepare, he insisted that wasn't necessary. "When you know you've found the right person, why wait?" he said, looking at me with those dark eyes that made me melt. "I want to start our life together, Sarah. I want you to be my wife. Why drag it out?" It seemed romantic at the time, passionate, a sign of how much he loved me, how eager he was to make me his wife. Now I wonder if he was rushing me, not giving me time to think, to question, to really consider what I was doing. But I agreed. We set the date for 6 months away in early spring. It would be tight, planning everything in that time frame, but my mother was thrilled to help, and David insisted money wasn't an issue. Those 6 months became a whirlwind of wedding planning. My mother went into overdrive, and honestly, the wedding became more her project than mine. She had opinions about everything. The venue, the flowers, the music, the menu, the guest list. David's family had money, more money than my family had, and my mother was determined to put on a wedding that would impress them. I got swept up in it all, dress fittings and cake tastings and invitation addressing. Sometimes I'd stop in the middle of it all and think, is this what I want? Is this too much? But then I'd look at David, at the way he smiled at me, at the ring on my finger, and I'd push those doubts aside. The wedding itself was beautiful, exactly like I described it earlier. 200 guests, an elegant venue, flowers everywhere, a dress that cost a fortune. It was everything my mother had dreamed of, everything that looked perfect in photos. I remember walking down the aisle on my father's arm, seeing David waiting for me at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, and thinking that this was it. This was my happily ever after. This was the moment my real life began. When we stood facing each other, hands clasped, and repeated our vows, I meant every single word with my whole heart. To love and to cherish, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, forsaking all others, until death do us part. I meant them, every promise, every commitment, every vow. I believed David meant them too. The reception was a blur of dancing and champagne toasts and congratulations from guests. We cut the cake together, his hand over mine on the knife. We danced our first dance as husband and wife to At Last by Etta James. We laughed with friends and family. We posed for hundreds of photos. When we finally left around midnight, heading to a hotel for the night before our flight to Italy the next morning, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. I had married my best friend. I had found my person. I had everything I'd ever wanted. Our honeymoon was 2 weeks in Italy, and it was magical. Rome with its ancient ruins and incredible history, Florence with its art and architecture, Venice with its canals and romantic gondola rides, the Amalfi Coast with its stunning views and intimate villages. We explored cities hand in hand. We ate incredible food and drank amazing wine. We made love in beautiful hotel rooms with views of historic sites. We talked for hours about our future, about the children we'd have someday, about growing old together, about all the adventures we'd share. David was attentive and romantic, everything a new husband should be. He planned surprise activities, bought me thoughtful gifts, told me he loved me 100 times a day. I felt cherished, valued, loved beyond measure. I took hundreds of photos on that trip. They're still on my phone, actually. I can't bring myself to delete them, even now. Photos of us at the Trevi Fountain, at the Colosseum, in front of the Duomo in Florence, on a gondola in Venice, overlooking the Mediterranean from a cliffside restaurant in Positano. In every photo, we're smiling. We look happy. We look in love. We look like the perfect couple on the perfect honeymoon, starting their perfect life together. I look at those photos now and wonder who that woman was. That smiling, naive, trusting woman who had no idea what was coming, who believed every word her husband said, who thought she knew him. I don't recognize her anymore. She's a stranger to me now. When we came home from our honeymoon, tanned and happy and full of plans, we moved into the house we'd bought together while we were engaged. David had insisted we buy before the wedding, said it would be good to have our home ready when we returned from Italy. I'd been nervous about the financial commitment, but he'd assured me we could afford it, that his job paid well enough to cover the mortgage easily. The house was in a nice neighborhood called Riverside Hills, about 20 minutes from both our jobs. It was a 3-bedroom colonial with blue shutters and a front porch, a yard with mature trees, a 2-car garage. It needed some cosmetic work, fresh paint and updated fixtures, but it had good bones, and David was excited about making it ours. We spent our first weeks as a married couple painting walls together, picking out furniture, arguing good-naturedly about whether the living room should be painted blue or gray. We settled on a soft gray-blue that satisfied both of us. We chose a couch together, a dining room table, curtains and rugs, and all the small things that turn a house into a home. We hosted our first dinner party 6 weeks after we moved in, inviting Rachel and her new boyfriend, Jennifer and her husband, and another couple from David's work. I cooked for hours, wanting everything to be perfect, wanting to prove I could be a good hostess. The evening went well. Everyone complimented the house, the food, the wine David had selected. As I cleared plates and refilled glasses, I felt proud. This was my life. This was what being a grown-up looked like. The first year of our marriage was, at least on the surface, good. We settled into routines. I went back to teaching, starting a new school year with a new class of third graders. David continued his climb up the corporate ladder at Henderson and Associates. We had date nights, weekend projects around the house, holiday celebrations with both our families. We were doing all the things married couples are supposed to do, building a life, creating traditions, becoming a family unit, even if it was just the two of us for now. My friends thought we were the perfect couple. My family adored David. His family welcomed me warmly. Everyone looked at us and saw success, happiness, a marriage to aspire to. But underneath that perfect surface, small cracks were already beginning to form. I just couldn't see them yet. Or maybe I could, and I chose to ignore them, to smooth them over, to pretend they weren't there. David's work hours started getting longer. At first, it was gradual, coming home at 6 instead of 5:30, then 6:30, then 7. He'd explain that he was working on an important project, that he needed to prove himself if he wanted to make senior analyst, that this was temporary. I understood, or at least I told myself I understood. Building a career takes sacrifice, doesn't it? And he was doing it for us, for our future, for the family we'd have someday. So I adjusted. I started planning dinners for later. I stayed at school longer, using the extra time to perfect my lesson plans and organize my classroom. I told myself this was normal, that all couples went through adjustment periods, that we'd find our rhythm eventually. But the hours kept getting later. 7 became 8. 8 became 9. Sometimes David wouldn't get home until 10 or even 11 at night, long after I'd eaten dinner alone, long after I'd given up waiting. When I'd gently ask about it, suggest maybe he could leave work a bit earlier sometimes, he'd get defensive. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Sarah," he'd say, his tone sharp in a way it never used to be. "I'm trying to advance my career. I'm trying to build a future for us. I thought you'd be supportive of that." And just like that, I became the bad guy, the unsupportive wife, the nag who didn't appreciate how hard her husband was working. The guilt would wash over me, heavy and suffocating, and I'd apologize for bringing it up. I stopped asking, stopped commenting on his late nights, stopped suggesting we spend more time together. I swallowed my loneliness and told myself this was temporary, just a busy period, something we'd get through together. But it wasn't temporary. It became our new normal. The business trips started increasing too. David had always traveled occasionally for work. That wasn't new. But the frequency ramped up dramatically in our second year of marriage. Weekend conferences, week-long training sessions, emergency client meetings in other cities, team-building retreats. At first, I didn't think much of it. More responsibility meant more travel. That made sense for someone moving up in their career. I missed him when he was gone, but I trusted him. I had no reason not to. But something about his travel started to feel off. He became vague about details. When I'd ask simple questions about where he was staying or what the conference was about, he'd give nonspecific answers or change the subject. "Just the usual hotel chain," he'd say when I asked where he was staying. "Some Marriott or Hilton, I can't remember which." "What's the conference about?" "Investment strategies, market trends, boring corporate stuff. You wouldn't be interested." The conversations started feeling less like sharing and more like evasion. But I pushed down my concerns, told myself I was being paranoid, being that clingy wife nobody wants to be. Our intimate life changed too, and this was perhaps the most painful shift. When we first got together, when we were dating and newly married, we couldn't keep our hands off each other. The chemistry was electric. We'd spend entire weekends in bed, talking and laughing and making love. It was passionate, connected, one of the ways we stayed close. But gradually, that changed. The frequency dropped. Once a week became once every 2 weeks, then once every 3 weeks, then once a month if I was lucky. When it did happen, it felt different, mechanical. Like David was going through the motions rather than actually wanting me. He seemed distracted, his mind somewhere else. Sometimes he couldn't finish, would pull away frustrated, mumbling apologies about stress and exhaustion. I tried everything. I initiated more often, wore lingerie he'd once loved, suggested new things to try. Nothing worked. If anything, my efforts seemed to annoy him, like I was pressuring him, adding to his stress rather than alleviating it. I started feeling rejected, unwanted, undesirable. Was it me? Had I become unattractive to him? Had I done something wrong? The questions circled in my head at night as I lay beside my husband in our bed, careful not to touch him, careful not to cross the invisible line that had formed down the center of our mattress. I suggested counseling. Lots of couples saw therapists, right? There was no shame in getting help. Maybe talking to a professional could help us reconnect. David's reaction was immediate and harsh. "There's nothing wrong with us," he said, his voice cold and final. "I'm just tired from work. Once I get this promotion, once things settle down, everything will go back to normal. We don't need to air our private business to some stranger who doesn't know us." "But David, we barely talk anymore. We barely touch. This isn't normal." I said, "No, Sarah." The tone left no room for argument. "We're fine. Stop making problems where there aren't any. Stop being so needy." Needy, the word hit me like a slap. I wasn't being needy. I was asking for basic intimacy, basic connection in my marriage. But his response made me feel ashamed for even wanting those things. So I stopped asking, stopped initiating, stopped trying. I built a wall around the hurt and rejection and told myself to be patient, to wait it out, that things would improve eventually. They didn't improve. They got worse. The distance between us grew wider with each passing month. We became roommates who happened to share a last name and a mortgage, strangers living parallel lives under the same roof. My friends started noticing the change in me. I'd lost weight without trying, too stressed and unhappy to eat properly. I'd stopped putting effort into my appearance, wearing the same rotation of comfortable clothes, skipping makeup most days. The joy I'd once had was fading, replaced by a weariness that went bone deep. "Sarah, are you okay?" Rachel asked me one Friday evening when we met for drinks, our usual end-of-week ritual. "You seem different lately, sad." "I'm just tired," I said automatically, the lie coming easily now. "Teaching is exhausting, you know that." She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me for a second. "How are things with David? We haven't seen him in months." "He's been really busy with work, but we're good. Everything's good." The lies tasted bitter on my tongue, but I couldn't admit the truth. Admitting my marriage was failing felt like admitting I'd failed. Like admitting I'd made a terrible mistake. Like admitting everyone who'd believed in us, who'd celebrated our wedding, who'd called us the perfect couple, had been wrong. I couldn't face that, so I lied. To my friends, to my family, to myself. My sister Emma was the only one who wouldn't let it go. Emma, who'd never liked David from the beginning, who'd tried to warn me, who I'd pushed away for daring to question my perfect relationship. We'd barely spoken in the past 2 years. The tension from my engagement party, when she'd expressed concerns about David, had never fully healed. We were polite at family gatherings, exchanged pleasantries, but the closeness we'd once had was gone. But Emma was still my sister, and despite everything, she still cared about me. That call she made 4 months ago, the one where she told me she'd seen David at Russo's when he was supposed to be in Chicago, that wasn't the first time she'd tried to warn me. It was just the first time she had concrete evidence. She'd been noticing things for months. The way David spoke to me, subtle condescension I'd become so accustomed to I didn't even hear it anymore. The way he controlled conversations, dominated decisions, made everything about him. The way my light had dimmed since marrying him, how I'd become smaller, quieter, less myself. But she hadn't said anything because the last time she'd expressed concerns, I'd cut her out of my life. She'd been waiting, watching, hoping I'd see it myself. When she saw David at that restaurant with another woman, she couldn't stay silent anymore. She had to tell me, even knowing I'd probably react badly, even risking our already fragile relationship. And I did react badly. I defended him. I believed his proof over her eyes. I chose my husband over my sister. A choice I would come to bitterly regret. The guilt from that phone call with Emma stayed with me for days. I'd accused my sister of lying, of trying to destroy my marriage. I'd sent her screenshots of David's hotel receipts and conference photos like I was proving her wrong, vindicating my husband. But even as I defended him, even as I showed her all that evidence, there was a tiny voice in the back of my mind whispering that something wasn't right. I tried to ignore that voice. I buried it under layers of justification and rationalization. David had proof, actual documented proof of where he'd been. Emma had made a mistake. She'd seen someone who looked like him. It happened all the time, didn't it? People had doppelgangers. The world was full of men in suits having dinner with women. It didn't mean anything. But that voice wouldn't completely go away. It sat there in the back of my consciousness, nagging at me during quiet moments. When I was alone in my classroom after school. When I was lying in bed at night listening to David breathe beside me. When I was cooking dinner for one because he was working late again. Something wasn't right. I knew it in my bones, in that deep intuitive place that women have learned to ignore because we're told we're being paranoid, emotional, irrational. I'd learned to silence that intuition, to trust logic and evidence over gut feelings. A lesson that had nearly destroyed me. 2 weeks after that confrontation with David about Emma's sighting, I started noticing changes in my body. Small things at first, so subtle I almost didn't register them. A tiredness that felt different from normal exhaustion. The kind of fatigue that lives in your bones, that makes every movement feel like you're pushing through water. I'd wake up after a full night's sleep, 8 solid hours, and feel like I hadn't rested at all. My alarm would go off at 6:30, and I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, trying to find the energy to get out of bed. My body felt heavy, weighted down by something I couldn't name. Getting up, showering, getting dressed, it all felt like climbing a mountain. At first, I blamed stress. The situation with Emma had been emotionally draining. My marriage was clearly struggling, even if I wasn't ready to fully admit it. Work had been demanding, with state testing coming up and pressure from administration to improve scores. Of course I was tired. Who wouldn't be tired under these circumstances? I started drinking more coffee. 2 cups became 3, then 4. I'd stop at the coffee shop on my way to school, get the largest size they offered, add an extra shot of espresso. It helped for maybe an hour, gave me a jolt of artificial energy that burned off quickly, leaving me even more exhausted than before. My students started noticing. 8-year-olds are remarkably perceptive, more so than adults give them credit for. They see things we think we're hiding. "Ms. Mitchell, are you okay?" A little girl named Sophie asked me one afternoon. "You look really tired." I forced a smile, ruffled her hair affectionately. "I'm fine, sweetie, just didn't sleep well last night. Thank you for asking." But I wasn't fine. The exhaustion was getting worse, spreading through my body like a fog. By the end of each school day, I could barely keep my eyes open. I'd sit at my desk after the students left, my head in my hands, fighting waves of tiredness that felt almost crushing. Sometimes I'd actually fall asleep sitting there, jolting awake 20 minutes later with papers stuck to my face, drool on my desk, feeling disoriented and ashamed. I started going to bed earlier. 9 o'clock, then 8:30, then 8. David barely noticed. He was usually still at work when I went to bed anyway, and he'd come home hours later, sliding into bed beside me without a word, careful not to wake me. Or maybe not caring whether he woke me or not. But no matter how early I went to bed, no matter how many hours I slept, the exhaustion remained. It was like my body was fighting something, using all its energy to battle an invisible enemy. Then the pain started. It began as a dull ache in my lower abdomen, so subtle at first that I barely registered it. Like the beginning of menstrual cramps, that familiar discomfort that women learn to live with. But my period wasn't due for another 2 weeks. I checked my calendar app 3 times to make sure, thinking maybe I'd miscounted. No, I was right in the middle of my cycle. This wasn't period pain. I took some ibuprofen, thinking it would pass, probably just stress manifesting physically. The body does strange things when you're under emotional strain. I'd read articles about it, how anxiety and stress can cause physical symptoms. This was probably that. But the ache didn't go away. It settled in, took up residence in my body like an unwelcome guest. Not unbearable, not severe enough to send me to the emergency room, but constant, always there. A persistent discomfort that colored everything I did. I used heating pads during the evenings, pressing the warmth against my abdomen while I graded papers on the couch. It helped a little, but the relief was temporary. As soon as I removed the heat, the ache came back, steady and insistent. I started taking ibuprofen regularly, more than I probably should have. 4 pills every 6 hours, right at the maximum recommended dose. It took the edge off, but didn't eliminate the pain completely. I told myself I just needed to get through this rough patch, that it would ease up eventually. It didn't ease up, it got worse. The pain became sharper, more insistent. Sometimes it would spike suddenly, making me gasp and double over. I'd be standing in front of my class, teaching a math lesson, and a wave of pain would hit me so hard I'd have to grab the edge of my desk for support. "Ms. Mitchell," my students would ask, concerned, "are you okay?" "I'm fine," I'd lie, forcing myself to stand up straight to keep teaching. "Just a little stomach ache, nothing to worry about." But I was worried. I was terrified, actually, though I wouldn't admit it even to myself. Because if I admitted I was scared, I'd have to do something about it. I'd have to face whatever was wrong, and I wasn't ready for that. Other symptoms started appearing, each one more alarming than the last. I noticed discharge that wasn't normal. I'm a grown woman, 34 years old. I've had a menstrual cycle for over 20 years. I know my body intimately, know what's normal and what isn't. This wasn't normal. The color was wrong, a yellowish-green tint that made my stomach turn when I saw it. The consistency was different, thicker than usual. And there was more of it than there should be, enough that I had to start wearing panty liners every day, changing them multiple times because they'd become soaked. I told myself it was probably just a yeast infection. Women got those all the time, didn't they? Nothing to be embarrassed about, nothing to panic over. I could get over-the-counter treatment at the drugstore. I went to CVS on my lunch break, feeling mortified even though I knew there was nothing shameful about buying feminine health products. I grabbed a box of yeast infection treatment off the shelf without really looking at it, practically threw money at the cashier, and left as quickly as possible. That night, I started the treatment, following the instructions carefully, praying it would work. Praying this would all clear up and I could stop worrying. But the symptoms didn't improve. If anything, they got worse. A burning sensation started, subtle at first but growing more pronounced each day. It was particularly bad when I used the bathroom, a sharp, stinging discomfort that made me wince and grip the edge of the sink. I started dreading bathroom breaks, holding it as long as I could, which I knew was making things worse, but I couldn't help it. The burning wasn't limited to urination. It was there during the day, too, a constant irritation that made me shift uncomfortably in my seat during staff meetings, during lessons, during everything. I felt like my entire pelvic region was on fire, a slow burn that never quite went away. I started feeling feverish. Not a high fever, nothing that registered on a thermometer, but that uncomfortable warmth that makes your skin feel too tight, that makes you alternate between sweating and shivering. I'd be sitting in my classroom in the middle of the day, and suddenly I'd be burning up, pulling off my cardigan, fanning myself with a stack of papers. Then, just as suddenly, I'd be freezing. Bone-deep chills that made my teeth chatter, made me pile on layers even though it was a perfectly comfortable temperature. My body's thermostat had gone haywire, and I had no idea why. I tried to ignore it all. I tried to convince myself it was nothing serious, just a series of minor issues that would resolve themselves. Mind over matter, right? If I just didn't think about it, if I just pushed through, everything would go back to normal. But my body had other ideas. My body was screaming at me that something was seriously wrong, and I was too afraid to listen. I started researching my symptoms online, which is always a terrible idea. Every symptom search led to a dozen terrifying possibilities. Cancer, endometriosis, pelvic inflammatory disease, ovarian cysts. The list went on, each diagnosis more frightening than the last. I'd sit up late at night, David already asleep beside me or still not home from work, scrolling through medical websites on my phone, my anxiety spiraling higher with each article I read. Then I'd force myself to close the browser, put down the phone. Tell myself I was being ridiculous. It was probably nothing. Stress and an easily treated infection. I just needed to give it more time. But time didn't help. 2 weeks passed, and instead of improving, everything got worse. The pain intensified. The discharge continued. The burning became almost unbearable. The exhaustion was crushing me, making it hard to function. I started canceling plans with friends, too tired and uncomfortable to socialize. Rachel texted me multiple times asking if I wanted to get drinks after work, our usual Friday ritual. I made excuses. Too much gratting to do, not feeling well. Maybe next week. Jennifer noticed I was skipping lunches in the teacher's lounge, eating alone in my classroom instead. She came to check on me one afternoon, concern written all over her face. "Sarah, what's going on? You've been avoiding everyone. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I lied, not meeting her eyes. "Just been feeling a little under the weather, nothing serious." "Have you seen a doctor?" "It's just a cold or something. It'll pass." But it wasn't passing, and it wasn't a cold. Deep down, I knew that. I knew something was seriously wrong. I was just too terrified to face it. I couldn't tell David. We barely talked anymore, and when we did, it was surface-level stuff. How was work? Did you pay the electric bill? What do you want for dinner? I couldn't imagine bringing up intimate health issues with him. He'd probably just get annoyed, tell me I was being dramatic, suggest I take some ibuprofen and stop complaining. Besides, talking to him about this would mean admitting we'd been intimate recently enough for me to have contracted something. And given how rarely that happened anymore, it felt almost absurd. When was the last time? 3 weeks ago? A month? I honestly couldn't remember. The occasions were so infrequent now that they didn't register as significant events. I felt completely alone, isolated in my fear and pain and confusion, too embarrassed to tell my friends, too estranged from my sister to reach out to her, too disconnected from my husband to confide in him. So I suffered in silence, pretending everything was fine while my body screamed that it wasn't. Then came the morning that changed everything. I woke up on a Tuesday and the pain was different. Not the dull ache I'd become accustomed to, but sharp, stabbing, insistent, like someone was twisting a knife in my lower abdomen. I tried to sit up and couldn't, the pain taking my breath away, making black spots dance in my vision. I lay there for a moment, breathing through it, waiting for it to pass. It didn't pass. If anything, it intensified, radiating through my pelvis, down my legs, up into my back. This wasn't stress. This wasn't something I could ignore anymore. David had already left for work. I was alone in the house, alone with this pain that was making me nauseous and dizzy. I managed to reach for my phone on the nightstand, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I called the school first, told the secretary I wouldn't be coming in, that I needed to see my doctor. My voice sounded strange even to my own ears, thin and strained with pain. "Sarah, are you okay?" the secretary asked, genuinely concerned. "You sound terrible." "I'll be fine," I managed. "Just need to get this checked out." As soon as I hung up, I called my doctor's office. The receptionist answered on the third ring, her voice cheerful and professional. "Riverside Medical, how can I help you?" "I need to see Dr. Martinez," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Today, if possible, it's urgent." "What seems to be the problem?" I closed my eyes, forcing myself to say the words. "I've been having some pain and other symptoms for a couple of weeks now. It's getting worse." There was a pause, the sound of clicking keys as she checked the schedule. "We actually just had a cancellation for 11 o'clock this morning. Dr. Martinez can see you then. Can you make it?" I looked at the clock. It was 8:30. I had 2.5 hours. Yes, I'll be there, thank you." Those 2.5 hours felt like an eternity. I managed to get out of bed, moving slowly, carefully, like a much older woman. Every step sent jolts of pain through my body. I made it to the bathroom, took a shower that I probably shouldn't have given how dizzy I felt, but I needed to be clean, needed to be presentable for the doctor. Getting dressed was an ordeal. Bending to put on pants made the pain spike. Reaching to fasten my bra made me gasp. I settled on loose yoga pants and a soft t-shirt, the most comfortable things I owned. I tried to eat breakfast but couldn't manage more than a few bites of toast. My stomach was churning, whether from pain or anxiety or both, I couldn't tell. I made coffee, thinking the caffeine might help with the dizziness, but it just made me feel more nauseous. I sat on my couch, watching the clock, willing time to move faster. Should I call David? Let him know I was going to the doctor. Part of me wanted him to care, to offer to meet me there, to be the supportive husband he'd promised to be. But another part of me, the part that had learned not to expect anything from him, told me not to bother. He was at work. He'd say he couldn't leave. He'd tell me I was overreacting. Or worse, he wouldn't answer at all, too busy with whatever he was really doing to pick up the phone for his wife. I decided not to call. I'd go to the appointment alone, find out what was wrong, and then I'd decide what to tell him. Maybe it would be nothing. Maybe Dr. Martinez would prescribe some antibiotics and everything would clear up and I'd never need to mention it. But deep in my gut, I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. At 10:30, I forced myself to leave the house. The drive to Dr. Martinez's office felt endless. Every red light made me want to scream. Every slow driver made my anxiety spike higher. I needed to know what was happening to my body. I needed answers. I needed someone to tell me this was all easily explained and easily fixed. But I was terrified of what those answers might be. Dr. Martinez's office was in a medical building near the hospital, a modern structure with a parking lot that was always too full. I circled twice before finding a spot near the back. The walk from my car to the building entrance felt like miles, the pain making me move slowly, carefully. The waiting room was half full when I checked in. I filled out the usual forms, my hand shaking as I wrote, making my normally neat handwriting look like a child's scrawl. There was a section asking what brought me in today. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to find words for symptoms I didn't want to admit. Finally, I wrote, pelvic pain, abnormal discharge, fatigue, clinical, detached, like these were someone else's symptoms, not mine. I sat in one of the waiting room chairs. A magazine open on my lap that I wasn't reading. My leg bounced nervously, an anxious tic I couldn't control. I watched other patients come and go, an elderly man with a cane, a pregnant woman who looked ready to pop any day, a teenager with his mother looking miserable with what was probably the flu. Normal people with normal ailments. I wondered if my problem was normal too, or if I was about to find out something terrible. Sarah Mitchell, a nurse, appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. I stood up too quickly, making my head spin and the pain spike. I followed her back through the maze of hallways to an exam room, answered her preliminary questions in a voice that didn't sound like my own. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your pain? Maybe a 7, sometimes higher. Have you had a fever? I feel feverish, but it doesn't register on a thermometer. Any nausea or vomiting? Some nausea, no vomiting. She took my vital signs. Blood pressure elevated. Temperature normal despite how I felt. Heart rate faster than usual. She noted everything on her tablet, her expression professionally neutral. Dr. Martinez will be right in, she said, giving me a sympathetic smile before leaving me alone in the exam room. I sat on the paper-covered exam table, the crinkling sound loud in the quiet room. The walls were covered with educational posters about healthy eating and exercise and disease prevention. I stared at them without really seeing them, my mind spinning with fear and possibilities. What if it was something serious? What if I needed surgery? What if I couldn't have children? David and I had talked about having kids someday, once his career was more established, once we were more financially stable. What if I'd waited too long and now it was too late? The door opened and Dr. Martinez walked in, and I felt a wave of relief just seeing her familiar face. Dr. Martinez was in her mid-50s, with warm brown eyes and graying hair she wore in a practical bob. She'd been my doctor for 6 years, had seen me through everything from the flu to my pre-marriage health screening. She was kind and thorough and actually listened, unlike some doctors who seem to rush you through appointments. "Sarah," she said warmly, sitting down on her rolling stool and pulling up my chart on the computer. "It's good to see you, though I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. Tell me what's been going on." And suddenly, faced with her kind concern and professional attention, I felt tears welling up. I'd been holding everything together for weeks, pretending I was fine, ignoring my symptoms, but I couldn't pretend anymore. Not here, not with her. I told her everything, the fatigue that had been crushing me for weeks, the pain that started dull and was now sharp and constant, the abnormal discharge, the burning sensation, the fever and chills. As I talked, I watched her expression change from friendly concern to professional focus. She was listening intently, occasionally making notes, asking clarifying questions. "How long have you been experiencing these symptoms?" "The tiredness for maybe 3 weeks, the pain for about 2, everything else for maybe 10 days. "And you said the discharge is yellowish green." I nodded, feeling my cheeks burn with embarrassment, even though I knew there was nothing to be ashamed of. "Any pain during urination?" "Yes, burning, it's pretty bad." "Have you been sexually active?" "I'm married, so yes, but not very frequently lately. Maybe 3 weeks ago was the last time." She nodded, making notes. "And you mentioned you tried over-the-counter yeast infection treatment." "Yes, about a week ago. It didn't help." "Okay." She set down her tablet and looked at me with those kind, concerned eyes. "Sarah, I'm going to need to do an examination, and I'm going to need to run some tests. Based on what you're describing, we need to check for several different possibilities." "What kind of possibilities?" I asked, though part of me already knew. Part of me had known for days what this might be but couldn't bring myself to face it. She chose her words carefully, her tone gentle but direct. "These symptoms can indicate various conditions: a severe urinary tract infection, bacterial vaginosis, pelvic inflammatory disease, but one thing we definitely need to test for is sexually transmitted infections." The room tilted. The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright. My mouth went dry. "That's not possible," I heard myself say, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm married. I've been with the same man for 8 years, just him, only him. I've been completely faithful." Dr. Martinez reached across the small space between us and took my hand. Her skin was warm, her grip gentle but grounding. "I understand, Sarah, and I'm not making any assumptions or accusations, but these tests are standard protocol for the symptoms you're presenting. We need to be thorough. We need to make sure we're treating the right thing and not missing something important." "But how could I?" I couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate the thought that was forming in my mind, the implication that was too terrible to voice. "Let's just run the tests," she said softly. "Let's get all the information before we jump to any conclusions. Okay." I nodded numbly, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. The examination was uncomfortable, made worse by my symptoms. Dr. Martinez was as gentle as possible, but I still winced and gasped as she conducted the exam. She took swabs, explaining what she was doing, apologizing when I flinched. "I'm going to test for chlamydia, gonorrhea, trichomoniasis, and a few other things," she said as she worked. "I'm also going to do a urinalysis to check for a UTI and some blood work to check for other infections." After the physical exam, a different nurse came in to draw blood. I watched the vials fill with dark red blood and thought about all the secrets my body was about to reveal, all the truths I wasn't ready to hear. "When will I get the results?" I asked Dr. Martinez as she finished typing her notes. The urinalysis will have today. The other tests will take a few days. I should have everything by Friday. I'll call you as soon as the results are in. Friday. It was Tuesday. 3 days of waiting, 3 days of not knowing, 3 days of anxiety and fear and terrible possibilities. In the meantime, Dr. Martinez continued, I'm going to prescribe you something for the pain and an antibiotic that should help if this is a bacterial infection. But Sarah, she paused, making sure I was looking at her. I need you to prepare yourself for the possibility that these test results might reveal something difficult. If any of the STI tests come back positive, we'll need to have a serious conversation. I knew what she meant. A conversation about where I might have gotten an infection that could only be transmitted sexually when I'd only been with one person. A conversation about my husband's fidelity. A conversation that would confirm my worst fears. I left the doctor's office in a daze, prescriptions in hand that I didn't remember her printing. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 10 minutes, staring at nothing, trying to process what had just happened. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be my life. I was a good person, a faithful wife, a dedicated teacher. Things like this didn't happen to people like me. But they did happen. They were happening right now to me. I drove to the pharmacy, dropped off the prescriptions, waited in my car while they filled them. I couldn't bring myself to go inside, to walk through the aisles like a normal person running normal errands. I wasn't normal anymore. I was a woman waiting to find out if her husband had given her a sexually transmitted infection. When the prescriptions were ready, I went through the drive-thru, barely looking at the pharmacist as he handed me the bag and explained how to take each medication. Pain pills, antibiotics, evidence that something was very wrong. I went home to my empty house and took the first doses of medication with a glass of water that I could barely swallow around the lump in my throat. Then I lay down on my couch, curled into a ball, and let myself cry for the first time in weeks. Great, racking sobs that shook my whole body. Tears that soaked the couch cushion beneath my face. The kind of crying that comes from deep in your soul, the kind that releases pressure but brings no real relief. I cried for the pain in my body. I cried for my failing marriage. I cried for the naive woman I'd been who believed in fairy tales and happy endings. I cried for the future I'd imagined that was slipping away. I cried because I knew, deep down in that place where truth lives, that everything was about to change. Emma had been right. She'd seen David with another woman, and I'd defended him. I'd believed his lies, his fabricated evidence, his gaslighting. I'd chosen him over my own sister, over my own instincts. And now I was paying the price. Literally paying it with my health, with my body, with my peace of mind. Those 3 days waiting for the test results were the longest of my life. Each hour felt like a day. Each day felt like a year. I went to work on Wednesday and Thursday because I didn't know what else to do, taught my lessons on autopilot, smiled at my students even though I felt dead inside. At home, I watched David with new eyes, studied him, searched for signs of guilt or remorse or anything that would indicate he knew what he'd done to me. But he seemed completely normal, utterly unchanged. He came home late from work both nights, ate the dinner I'd prepared without really tasting it, disappeared into his home office or the TV, went to bed. If he noticed I was quieter than usual, more withdrawn, he didn't comment. If he noticed the prescription bottles on my nightstand, he didn't ask what they were for. He barely looked at me, barely registered my existence. And I studied him, this man I'd married, and wondered how I'd ever thought I knew him. He was a stranger. A handsome, successful, charming stranger who'd somehow convinced me to bind my life to his. I didn't tell him about the doctor's appointment. Didn't mention the tests I was waiting on. Part of me wanted to see his reaction, wanted to watch his face when I told him they were testing me for STIs. Would he panic? Would he confess? Would he finally show some emotion? But I kept silent. Some instinct told me to wait, to get the results first, to have concrete evidence before I confronted him. Because if I was wrong, if the tests came back negative, I'd have opened a can of worms for nothing. I'd have revealed my suspicions and damaged our marriage even further. Though I didn't know how much more damaged it could get. On Thursday night, I barely slept. I lay in bed beside my husband, our bodies carefully positioned to never touch, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow I'd get the results. Tomorrow I'd know for certain whether my suspicions were justified or whether I was losing my mind. I tried to prepare myself for both possibilities. If the tests were negative, I'd need to apologize to David for even suspecting him, apologize to myself for being paranoid, find some other explanation for my symptoms, if they were positive. I couldn't let myself think about that. Not yet. Not until I knew for sure. Friday dragged by with excruciating slowness. Every time my phone rang, my heart jumped into my throat, but it was never Dr. Martinez's office. Parent calling about homework, the school secretary with a question, Rachel asking if I wanted to get drinks that evening. I told Rachel no, made another excuse. I couldn't imagine sitting in a bar making small talk when I was waiting for news that might destroy my entire life. At 2:30, during my planning period while my students were at music class, my phone finally rang. Dr. Martinez's office. The screen lit up with the name, and I stared at it for 3 rings before I could make myself answer. Hello. Sarah, this is Dr. Martinez. Can you come to my office this afternoon? I'd like to discuss your test results in person. In person. Those 2 words told me everything I needed to know before she said another word. Good news came over the phone. A quick call to say everything looks normal, nothing to worry about, you're all clear. In person meant something was wrong. In person meant news that needed to be delivered face to face with compassion and care because it was going to hurt. What time? My voice sounded strange, distant, like it was coming from someone else. Can you come now? I have some time between appointments if you can get here in the next half hour. I looked at the clock, 2:35. School ended at 3:15. I can be there by 3:30. I'll see you then, Sarah. The call ended. I sat there at my desk, staring at my phone, my hands trembling. This was it. This was the moment everything changed. I gathered my things mechanically, like a robot going through programmed motions. I stopped by the office, told them I had a doctor's appointment and needed to leave a few minutes early. The secretary gave me a concerned look but didn't ask questions. The drive to Dr. Martinez's office happened in a blur. I don't remember the route I took, the turns I made. I was on autopilot, my mind already racing ahead to the conversation I was about to have. Positive. The test was positive. I had a sexually transmitted infection. There was no other reason she'd want to see me in person. No other reason for that careful, sympathetic tone in her voice. I parked in almost the exact same spot I'd parked 3 days ago, walked the same path to the building entrance, checked in at the same desk, but everything felt different now, heavier, more real. The moment of truth had arrived, and I couldn't run from it anymore. The receptionist gave me a sympathetic smile as she checked me in, the kind of smile you give someone you pity. How much did she know? Had Dr. Martinez told her? Did the entire office know that I was the wife whose husband had given her an STI? I sat in the waiting room, but only for a few minutes before a nurse called my name. She led me not to an exam room but directly to Dr. Martinez's office, and that felt significant somehow. This wasn't a medical conversation. This was a personal one. Dr. Martinez was sitting behind her desk, papers spread out in front of her. Lab results, I realized. My lab results. The scientific proof of my husband's betrayal laid out in neat columns and clinical terminology. She stood when I entered, came around her desk to shake my hand, gestured for me to sit in the chair across from her. Her expression was sympathetic, sad, the look of someone about to deliver devastating news. Sarah, she began gently, sitting back down and folding her hands on top of the papers. Thank you for coming in so quickly. I know this must be very stressful for you. I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. I just nodded, my hands gripping the armrests of the chair so tightly my knuckles turned white. She took a breath, and I saw her choosing her words carefully, trying to find the kindest way to say something terrible. I'm very sorry, but your tests came back positive for chlamydia. The word hung in the air between us. Chlamydia. A sexually transmitted infection. Something you get from sexual contact with someone who has it. Something I could have only gotten from one person because I'd only been intimate with one person. My husband had given me chlamydia, which meant he'd gotten it from someone else, which meant Emma had been right, which meant David had been cheating on me, lying to me, gaslighting me, making me feel crazy for suspecting him, all while he was having an affair and bringing home infections to give to his faithful, devoted, trusting wife. "That's not possible," I whispered, even though I knew it was, even though the evidence was right there in front of me. "There has to be a mistake." "I ran the tests twice, Sarah." Dr. Martinez's voice was gentle but firm. "Once when the initial results came back, and then again to confirm. There's no mistake. You have chlamydia." My mind was racing, desperately trying to find any other explanation, any possibility that didn't involve my husband's infidelity. "Can you get it from a toilet seat, or sharing towels, or swimming pools, or—" "No," she said it kindly but definitively, cutting off my desperate searching. "Those are common myths, but they're not true. Chlamydia is transmitted through sexual contact. Vaginal, anal, or oral sex with someone who has the infection. That's the only way you can contract it." "But I've only been with David," I said, my voice breaking. Tears were starting to fall, hot tracks down my cheeks that I didn't bother to wipe away. "Only him, for 8 years. I've never been with anyone else. I've been completely, 100% faithful." Dr. Martinez didn't say anything. She didn't need to. We both knew what this meant. If I'd only been with David and I had chlamydia, then David had to have chlamydia. And if David had chlamydia, he'd gotten it from sexual contact with someone else. The logic was inescapable, undeniable, scientific fact presented in black and white test results. "If you've only been intimate with your husband," Dr. Martinez said carefully, "then he would need to be tested and treated as well. Sarah, if his test comes back positive, and given your results it almost certainly will, then you need to understand that means he contracted it from someone else, from sexual contact with another person." I was crying harder now, my whole body shaking with sobs I couldn't control. All the denial, all the rationalizations, all the excuses I'd been making for him, they all crumbled in the face of this evidence. This scientific, irrefutable proof. Dr. Martinez pushed a box of tissues across her desk toward me. I took several, pressing them against my face, trying to muffle the sounds of my breakdown. This was a doctor's office. There were other patients outside. I needed to pull myself together. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop crying. Couldn't stop the grief and rage and humiliation that was pouring out of me. "Sarah, I know this is devastating news," Dr. Martinez said softly. "I'm so sorry, but there is some good news in all of this. Chlamydia is very treatable. A course of antibiotics will clear it up completely." Treatable? Like that was supposed to make me feel better. Like the fact that pills could cure the infection somehow erase the betrayal that caused it. "However," she continued, and something in her tone made me look up, made me focus through my tears, "you mentioned you've had symptoms for about 2 weeks, which means you've likely had the infection for longer than that. Chlamydia often doesn't show symptoms immediately." "How much longer?" I managed to ask. "It's hard to say exactly. Could be weeks, could be months. It varies from person to person." "Months? I could have had this infection for months while David smiled at me, kissed me, pretended to be a faithful husband." "We need to make sure it hasn't caused any complications," Dr. Martinez continued. "Untreated chlamydia can lead to pelvic inflammatory disease, which is what's likely causing your pain. PID can affect your fertility if it's not treated promptly." Fertility? My ability to have children. The family David and I had talked about starting someday, when the time was right, when his career was more stable. That future might not exist anymore because of what he'd done to me. "I'm going to prescribe you a stronger antibiotic specifically for the chlamydia," she was saying, pulling up something on her computer. "You'll need to take it exactly as prescribed, the full course even if you start feeling better. I also want you to come back in 2 weeks for a follow-up to make sure the infection is clearing and to check for any damage from the PID." I nodded numbly, not really processing her words. You'll need to abstain from sexual activity until you've completed treatment and been retested to make sure the infection is gone, she continued. And Sarah, your husband absolutely must be tested and treated as well. Even if he's not showing symptoms, he could still be carrying the infection. He'll need to be treated before you can be intimate again, otherwise you'll just keep reinfecting each other. The idea of being intimate with David ever again made my stomach turn. How could I ever touch him again knowing what he'd done? How could I ever trust him again? Here's your prescription, Dr. Martinez said, printing something out and handing it to me. And here's information about chlamydia, the treatment, what to expect. And Sarah, she paused, making sure I was looking at her. I want to give you some resources. Information about counseling services, support groups for women dealing with infidelity. You don't have to face this alone. She handed me several pamphlets. I took them without looking at them, just shoved them in my purse along with the prescription and the lab results she'd printed out for me. Lab results that proved my husband's affair in clinical, scientific language. Results that spelled out betrayal in words like positive and bacterial count and recommended treatment. Do you have someone you can call? Dr. Martinez asked gently. Someone who can be with you right now. You shouldn't be alone when you're processing this kind of news. Emma, my sister who I'd pushed away, who I'd accused of lying, who'd been trying to warn me and I wouldn't listen. She was the person I should call. But how could I face her? How could I admit she'd been right and I'd been so terribly wrong? Yes, I lied. I have someone. Okay, Dr. Martinez stood, indicating our appointment was over. Please call me if you have any questions or if your symptoms worsen. And Sarah, I'm truly sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. I stood on shaking legs, gathered my things, and somehow made it out of her office. Through the waiting room where other patients sat with their normal problems. Through the building lobby, across the parking lot to my car. I got in, closed the door, and just sat there. The manila folder with my test results was in my lap. I opened it, looked at the papers inside. There it was, in black and white medical terminology. Test, chlamydia trachomatis. Result, positive. Confirmed by secondary testing. My husband had cheated on me. He'd been intimate with someone else. He'd contracted an infection and brought it home to me. He'd put my health, potentially my fertility, at risk. And he'd looked me in the eye and made me feel crazy for even suspecting him. I sat in that parking lot for 45 minutes, just staring at those results, letting the reality sink in. My marriage was over. There was no coming back from this. No amount of counseling or forgiveness could erase what he'd done. But I wasn't ready to confront him yet. I needed time. I needed to think. I needed to decide what to do with this information. I drove home, my vision blurred with tears, probably shouldn't have been driving at all but operating on pure autopilot. When I got to our house, David's car wasn't in the driveway. Still at work, or at least that's where he claimed to be. I went inside, sat at our kitchen table, and spread the papers out in front of me. Test results. Prescription. Information pamphlets about chlamydia and infidelity counseling. Evidence. Proof. The end of everything I'd thought my life was. And somewhere in the midst of my grief and shock and devastation, a new feeling started to emerge. It started small, just a tiny spark in the darkness of my pain. But it grew, fed by humiliation and betrayal and righteous fury. Anger. Not just sadness, not just hurt, pure white-hot rage. David had done this to me. He'd lied to me, cheated on me, infected me with a disease. He'd made me doubt myself, doubt my sister, doubt my own sanity. He'd gaslit me, manipulated me, made me feel guilty for asking reasonable questions. He'd betrayed every single vow he'd made to me on our wedding day. And somehow I knew he wasn't going to admit it. He was going to lie. He was going to make excuses. He was going to find some way to make this my fault, to twist the narrative so I was the problem. I'd been the understanding wife for too long. The supportive partner who swallowed her pain and pretended everything was fine. The woman who made herself smaller to make room for her husband's ego. But I was done. I was done being that woman. David had started this war, but I was going to finish it. I just needed to decide how. I needed a plan, because going in angry and emotional would give him the advantage. He'd use my feelings against me, paint me as hysterical, irrational. I needed to be smart, strategic. I needed to gather more information, build an ironclad case, prepare myself for whatever was coming. But first, I needed to face him. I needed to tell him about the test results and watch his reaction. I needed to see if there was even a shred of remorse, any tiny piece of the man I'd married still left inside this stranger I'd been living with. I'd give him one chance, one opportunity to be honest, to come clean, to show me he was capable of taking responsibility for what he'd done. And if he didn't, if he lied to my face even with scientific evidence in front of him, then all bets were off. I spent the rest of Friday evening preparing myself for the conversation we needed to have. I rehearsed what I would say, practiced keeping my voice steady and calm. I decided I wouldn't cry, wouldn't yell, wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break down. I would present the evidence like a lawyer presenting a case, clinical and detached. David came home at 7:30, earlier than he'd been coming home lately. I heard his key in the lock, heard him drop his briefcase in the entryway, heard his footsteps as he walked into the kitchen where I was sitting. "Hey," he said casually, going to the refrigerator. "What's for dinner?" I looked at him, this man I'd devoted 8 years of my life to, and felt nothing but contempt. "We need to talk." Something in my tone made him pause, made him actually look at me for the first time in weeks. "What's wrong?" "I went to the doctor today." "Okay, are you sick or something?" I got some test results back. I pushed the papers across the table toward him. "I have chlamydia, David, a sexually transmitted infection, and since I've only been with you, there's only one way I could have gotten it." I watched his face carefully, looking for guilt, for shock, for anything that would indicate he knew what I was talking about. What I got instead would haunt me for the rest of my life. First came confusion, his brow furrowing as he picked up the papers and scanned them. Then came something else, something I didn't expect. His expression shifted, and I saw a flash of panic quickly masked. Then his face hardened into something cold and calculating. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice dismissive. He actually laughed, a short, harsh sound that made my blood run cold. "You can't seriously be accusing me of giving you an STD." "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm telling you what the doctor told me. I have chlamydia. I've only been with you. Therefore, you must have it too, which means you got it from somewhere, from someone." This is insane. There must be some mistake with the tests. "They ran them twice. There's no mistake." "Then maybe you got it some other way. Maybe it's been dormant in your system from before we met. Maybe." "That's not how it works, David. I know you know that. Stop lying to me." His eyes flashed with anger. "I'm not lying. You're the one making wild accusations based on faulty test results. Maybe you need to find a better doctor." I felt my carefully maintained composure starting to crack. This was exactly what I'd predicted. He was going to deny everything, twist the facts, make me question reality itself. "My sister was right," I said quietly. "She saw you at Russo's when you were supposed to be in Chicago with another woman, and I defended you. I called her a liar to protect you, but she was right, wasn't she?" David's face transformed into a mask of righteous indignation. "Are we back to this again? I showed you proof I was in Chicago, hotel receipts, conference photos, everything, and you're still listening to your bitter sister's lies." "Then explain the test results." My voice was rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "Explain how I have a sexually transmitted infection when I've been faithful to you." "I don't know, Sarah. Maybe you haven't been as faithful as you claim." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. He was actually trying to turn this around on me, suggest that I was the one who'd been unfaithful. "You know that's not true," I said, my voice shaking now with rage rather than tears. "You know I would never." "Do I?" he interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're the one with the infection, not me. Maybe you should think about what that means." I stared at him, this man I'd married, and couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not only was he denying his affair, he was accusing me of having one. The gaslighting was so blatant, so egregious, it actually took my breath away. "Get tested," I said, my voice cold and hard. "Go to a doctor and get tested for chlamydia, then we'll know for sure who's lying." "I'm not going to waste time and money on tests for an infection I don't have," he said dismissively. "This whole thing is ridiculous. I think you need to see a therapist, Sarah. You're becoming paranoid and delusional." And with that, he walked out of the kitchen, leaving me sitting there with the test results in front of me, shaking with fury and disbelief. That night, David slept in the guest room, claiming he didn't want to sleep next to someone who was obviously having some kind of mental breakdown. I didn't sleep at all. I lay in our bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. He denied everything. Even with proof, even with scientific evidence, he'd looked me in the eye and lied. And worse, he'd tried to make me doubt my own sanity. But I wasn't crazy. I had the test results. I had the truth, and I was going to make him face it whether he wanted to or not. Over the weekend, David avoided me completely. He left early Saturday morning, claiming he had to go into the office. He came back late, went straight to the guest room, barely said 2 words to me. Sunday was more of the same. He was punishing me for daring to question him, for daring to confront him with evidence of his affair. He was treating me like I was the problem, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. And that's when something shifted inside me. All the pain, all the hurt, all the devastation I'd been feeling transformed into something else entirely. A plan started forming in my mind, a way to make him face the truth, a way to expose him not just to me, but to everyone, a way to make sure he couldn't lie his way out of this, couldn't gaslight me or anyone else. But I needed more information first. I needed to know who the other woman was. I needed evidence beyond just the test results. I started digging. Monday after school, I came home and went through David's things while he was still at work. His laptop was password protected, but I knew his passwords. He used the same 3 variations for everything, had for years. I tried them until one worked. His email was the first thing I checked. I went through months of messages, looking for anything suspicious. There were hundreds of work emails, meaningless corporate correspondence, but buried in there, I found a folder he thought he'd hidden. A folder of messages to and from someone named Jessica. My hands shook as I opened the first email. It was from 4 months ago, casual and friendly. She'd enjoyed meeting him at the conference. Maybe they could get coffee next time he was in town. The messages got progressively more intimate. Inside jokes, compliments, plans to meet. By 3 months ago, the messages were explicitly sexual, detailed descriptions of what they wanted to do to each other, photos that made me want to vomit. Jessica, her name was Jessica. She was 26 years old, worked in marketing at a firm that partnered with David's company. Blonde, beautiful, everything I apparently wasn't. They'd been seeing each other for at least 4 months, probably longer, meeting up during his business trips, spending weekends together while I sat at home thinking he was at conferences. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. I took screenshots of everything, forwarded the most damning emails to my own account, careful to delete the sent messages so he wouldn't know I'd been in his email. I found his phone records next, downloaded copies of his bills. Hundreds of calls and texts to a number I didn't recognize. I cross-referenced it with the emails. Jessica's number. I found credit card statements showing charges at hotels he hadn't mentioned, restaurants in cities he'd never told me he was visiting, expensive gifts that I'd never received. I built a case, a comprehensive, detailed, undeniable record of his affair, every lie he'd told, every place he'd been that he'd lied about, every dollar he'd spent on another woman. And as I compiled all this evidence, my anger grew hotter and brighter. He thought he could make me feel crazy. He thought he could deny everything and I'd just accept it. He had no idea what he'd unleashed. By Thursday, a week after I'd gotten my test results, I had everything I needed. Screenshots, phone records, credit card statements, hotel receipts. I had Jessica's full name, her address, her place of employment, her social media profiles. And I had a plan. That evening, I waited for David to come home. He'd been avoiding me all week, coming home late, staying in the guest room, barely acknowledging my existence. But tonight was different. Tonight I was ready. He came home at 9:30, looking tired and annoyed to find me still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop. "We need to talk," I said. He sighed heavily, like I was a burden he was tired of carrying. "Sarah, I'm not doing this again. I'm not having another one of your paranoid episodes." "Not a paranoid episode, David. I have proof." I turned my laptop around so he could see the screen. An email from him to Jessica, dated 2 weeks ago. Explicitly sexual, undeniably from his email address. I watched the color drain from his face. He started. "How did I get into your email? You use the same passwords for everything. Did you really think I wouldn't figure them out?" I pulled out my phone. "I also have your phone records. 473 calls to Jessica's number in the past 3 months. I have your credit card statements showing hotel stays during weekends you claim to be at conferences. I have everything, David." He stood there, opening and closing his mouth like a fish, no words coming out. "You gave me chlamydia," I continued, my voice deadly calm. "You had an affair with Jessica, contracted an infection, and gave it to your wife. Then you lied about it. You tried to make me think I was crazy. You accused me of being unfaithful when you're the one who broke our vows." "Sarah, I can explain." "No," I stood up, facing him across the kitchen. "You can't explain this. There's no explanation that makes this okay. You cheated on me. You lied to me. You risked my health. And when I confronted you with proof, you tried to make me doubt my own sanity." "It was a mistake," he said, and I saw tears in his eyes now. Fake tears, I realized, another manipulation. "It meant nothing, it's over. It was just physical, Sarah, I love you." I almost laughed at that. Almost. "You don't love me. You love having a wife, having the image of a stable marriage, but you don't love me." "I do. Sarah, please, we can get past this. We can go to counseling, work through this." "You said no to counseling," I reminded him coldly. "Remember, when I suggested it a year ago, you said there was nothing wrong with us, that I was making problems where there weren't any." "I was wrong. I see that now. Please just give me a chance to fix this." I looked at him, this man who'd promised to love and cherish me, and felt absolutely nothing. No love, no hate, just cold, hard determination. "Get out," I said quietly. "What?" "Get out of this house. Go stay with Jessica, since you've been spending so much time with her anyway. I want you gone." "This is my house too, Sarah. You can't just kick me out." "Actually, I can. I already called a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. And unless you want me to send all this evidence to your boss, to your parents, to everyone we know, you'll leave quietly." I watched him realize I wasn't bluffing, that I had all the power now, that he'd underestimated me catastrophically. "Fine," he said, his voice hard with barely contained rage. "I'll pack some things, but this isn't over, Sarah." "You're right," I agreed. "It's not until I'm done with you." He went upstairs to pack, and I sat back down at the kitchen table, my hands shaking with adrenaline. I'd done it. I'd confronted him. I'd taken control. But David had one more humiliation in store for me. One more devastating blow that would push me past the breaking point and into something darker. 3 days later, on Sunday afternoon, I got a text from David. We needed to exchange some belongings. He had some of my things at the apartment he was staying at. I had some of his here. Could we meet to swap them? I agreed, figuring it was better to get it over with. He suggested meeting at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. I said fine. I showed up at 2 o'clock, carrying a box of his belongings I'd packed up. I scanned the coffee shop looking for him, and my blood turned to ice. He wasn't alone. David was sitting at a corner table, and beside him, her hand possessively on his arm, was a blonde woman I recognized from her social media photos. Jessica. He'd brought his mistress to meet his wife. He'd brought the woman he'd been cheating with, the woman who'd given him the infection he'd passed to me, to this meeting. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to process what I was seeing. This had to be a nightmare. This couldn't actually be happening. David saw me and smiled. Actually smiled. Like this was all perfectly normal. I walked over to their table on shaking legs, the box in my arms feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Sarah," David said casually, "this is Jessica. Jessica, this is my soon-to-be ex-wife Sarah." Jessica looked me up and down with barely concealed contempt. Up close, she was even more beautiful than in her photos. Young, blonde, perfect skin, designer clothes. Everything I apparently wasn't good enough to be. "Nice to finally meet you," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "David's told me so much about you." I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't believe this was happening. "So here are your things," David said, pushing a small bag across the table toward me. "I think that's everything." I set the box down, took the bag, still unable to form words. And then David did something that broke me completely. He looked at Jessica and laughed, actually laughed. "See, I told you she'd be speechless. She always gets like this when she doesn't know what to say." Jessica laughed too, a tinkling sound that made me want to scream. Poor thing, this must be so hard for her. "Oh, please," David said, his voice loud enough for other customers to hear. "Don't feel bad for her. Sarah's been a frigid, boring wife for years. You think I wanted to look elsewhere? She drove me to it." The words hit me like physical blows. He was mocking me, humiliating me, in public, in front of his mistress, in front of strangers. "I mean, look at her," he continued, gesturing at me like I was an object, not a person. "When's the last time you wore makeup, Sarah? Or did anything with your hair? You let yourself go. What did you expect?" Jessica's eyes sparkled with cruel amusement. "Well, you have me now, baby. You don't need to settle anymore." "You're right," David said, pulling her close and kissing her right in front of me. A long, intimate kiss that made several people in the coffee shop look away uncomfortably. When they finally pulled apart, David looked at me with something like pity. "You can go now, Sarah. We have plans." I stood there, frozen, tears streaming down my face, while they laughed at me. While my husband and his mistress mocked me, humiliated me, made me feel like nothing. And everyone in that coffee shop watched, witnessed my ultimate degradation, saw me crying while my husband paraded his affair partner in front of me. I don't remember leaving. Don't remember the walk to my car or the drive home. I just remember sitting in my driveway, hands gripping the steering wheel, whole body shaking with the force of my rage and humiliation. He'd done that on purpose, brought her there specifically to hurt me, to humiliate me, to assert his power over me one more time, to show me that he could do whatever he wanted and I couldn't stop him. He'd looked at me like I was pathetic, worthless, nothing. And she'd laughed. The woman who destroyed my marriage, who'd knowingly slept with a married man, had laughed at my pain. I sat in my car as the sun set, as darkness fell around me, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The pain was still there, the hurt, the devastation, but underneath it all was something new, something cold and hard and absolutely ruthless. They wanted to play games. They wanted to humiliate me. Fine. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. Because I had something neither of them knew about, something I'd been holding on to, waiting for the right moment to use. I had Jessica's phone number, her email, her workplace information. And I had the test results proving David had given me chlamydia. Test results that Jessica would be very, very interested to see. Because if David had given it to me, he'd almost certainly given it to her too. And somehow, I doubted he'd mentioned that little detail. I pulled out my phone, opened a new email to the address I'd found in David's messages, and attached the test results. The subject line read, "Something you should know about David." In the body of the email, I wrote, "David gave me chlamydia. If you've been sleeping with him, you should get tested. I'm his wife, by the way, the one he's apparently been calling frigid while giving both of us STDs. You're welcome." I hit send, before I could second-guess myself. Then I sat back and waited for the fallout. Because this was just the beginning. David thought he'd won, thought he'd broken me, thought he could humiliate me and walk away laughing. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated me. And I was going to make sure he regretted that for the rest of his life. I sat in my car for another hour after sending that email, watching my phone screen like it was going to explode. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my fingertips, in my temples. What had I just done? I'd gone nuclear. I'd dropped a bomb right in the middle of David's affair, and now I was just waiting to see what kind of devastation it would cause. Part of me felt sick about it. The old Sarah, the one who'd existed just months ago, would never have done something like this. She would have suffered in silence, cried into her pillow, maybe confided in a close friend over wine. She would have taken the high road, been the bigger person, handled her divorce with quiet dignity. But that Sarah was dead. She died in that coffee shop, watching her husband kiss another woman, listening to him mock her, seeing strangers witness her humiliation. In her place was someone harder, someone angrier, someone who discovered that there was a certain freedom in having nothing left to lose. My phone buzzed. A notification. My heart stopped. Was it Jessica responding already? I grabbed the phone so fast I nearly dropped it. But it wasn't Jessica. It was Emma, my sister, the one I'd pushed away, the one I'd accused of lying, the one who'd been right about everything. "Sarah, can we please talk? I miss you. I'm worried about you." I stared at that message for a long time. Emma, I needed to call her. I needed to apologize for everything I'd said, everything I'd accused her of. She'd tried to warn me and I'd thrown it in her face. She'd seen the truth when I was too blind to see it myself. But I couldn't call her yet. Not until I'd finished what I'd started. Not until I could tell her the whole story, including how spectacularly I was burning David's life to the ground. She deserved to know that her little sister had finally grown a spine. I drove home as darkness settled completely over the city. Our house, the one David and I had bought together, looked different now. It wasn't home anymore. It was just a building, a structure that held the remnants of a life I'd thought I was living but never actually had. Inside, I went straight to my laptop. I needed to know if Jessica had seen the email yet. I refreshed my inbox obsessively, checking every 30 seconds even though I knew that was pointless. Maybe she didn't check email on weekends. Maybe she'd seen it and was ignoring it. Maybe she already knew about the chlamydia and didn't care. That last thought made my blood boil. What kind of woman knowingly sleeps with a married man who has an STD? What kind of person laughs at the wife's pain, mocks her suffering, acts like destroying a marriage is some kind of victory? I opened social media, something I rarely did anymore. I found Jessica's Instagram, which was public because of course it was. Women like her wanted the world to see how perfect their lives were. I scrolled through her feed. Perfectly filtered photos of brunch plates and designer handbags and exotic vacations. Selfies with captions about living your best life and being unstoppable and knowing your worth. And there, from just 3 hours ago, a new post. My breath caught in my throat. It was a photo of her and David at that coffee shop. She'd taken it right after I left, I realized. They were both smiling at the camera, David's arm around her shoulders, looking like the perfect happy couple. The caption read, "Finally got to meet the ex today. Can officially start our future together now. New beginnings with my love read new chapter happy at last upgrade complete." The ex. She'd called me the ex. Like I was already ancient history. Like 8 years of marriage could be erased with a hashtag. The comments were full of heart emojis and congratulations and friends saying they were such a cute couple. People who had no idea they were celebrating an affair, applauding a man who'd given his wife an STD and then mocked her suffering. I screenshot the post, added it to the folder of evidence I was building. Then I looked at Jessica's profile more carefully. She'd tagged her workplace in her bio, Radiance Marketing Solutions. Of course she worked in marketing. Of course she had a job title like Brand Strategy Specialist. I opened a new tab and searched for Radiance Marketing Solutions. Found their website. Their Our Team page. And there was Jessica, with her professional headshot and bio talking about her passion for innovative brand storytelling and her commitment to authentic client relationships. Authentic, the irony was almost funny. The company had a contact page, a general email address for inquiries. I stared at it for a long moment, an idea forming in my mind. An idea that the old Sarah would have immediately dismissed as too cruel, too vindictive, too much. But the new Sarah, the one born from humiliation and betrayal, thought it was perfect. I drafted an email, this time from a burner email address I created specifically for this purpose. Professional, concerned, anonymous. To whom it may concern, I recently had an encounter with one of your employees, Jessica Morrison, that I felt compelled to bring to your attention. Ms. Morrison engaged in a relationship with a married man. I have evidence. And when confronted by his wife, she publicly mocked and humiliated the woman in a coffee shop where many witnesses were present. The behavior was cruel, unprofessional, and reflected extremely poorly on anyone associated with your company. I thought you should be aware of the character of person representing your brand, a concerned citizen. I didn't send it, not yet. I saved it in my drafts, another weapon in my arsenal to be deployed at the right moment. I needed to be strategic about this. Timing was everything. My phone buzzed again. This time my heart actually stopped. It was an email notification from Jessica. I opened it with shaking hands, my breath coming in short gasps. What the fuck is this? Is this some kind of joke? David doesn't have anything. He got tested and he's fine. You're just a pathetic, jealous bitch trying to cause problems because you can't accept that he chose me over you. Grow up and move on. He's mine now. I read the email 3 times, and with each reading, my smile got wider. She'd taken the bait. She'd responded. And more importantly, she'd revealed something crucial. David had told her he got tested and was fine. Which meant one of 2 things. Either he'd lied to her about getting tested, or he'd actually gotten tested, gotten a positive result, and lied to her about it. Either way, he'd lied, and Jessica had no idea. I crafted my response carefully, keeping my tone calm and factual, knowing that would infuriate her more than matching her aggression. Jessica, I'm not trying to cause problems. I'm trying to help you, whether you believe that or not. I have the test results from my doctor showing I have chlamydia. I've been faithful to David throughout our marriage. The only way I could have contracted it is from him. If he told you he got tested and is negative, he's lying to you, just like he lied to me for months. But by all means, trust the man who cheated on his wife. I'm sure he's completely honest with his mistress. I attached my test results again, this time with my personal information redacted, but the positive chlamydia result clearly visible. Then I added one more line. The symptoms include abnormal discharge, pelvic pain, and burning during urination. If you're experiencing any of these, you should see a doctor immediately. Untreated chlamydia can cause infertility. But what do I know? I'm just a pathetic, jealous bitch. Good luck with my husband. You deserve each other. I hit send and felt a rush of savage satisfaction. Let her chew on that. Let her wonder if she was experiencing symptoms. Let her doubt David's honesty. Let her feel a fraction of the anxiety and fear I'd felt. Minutes passed. Then my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. Hello? You fucking bitch. It was Jessica, and she was screaming so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. You're lying. You're making this all up to break us up because you're a miserable, lonely. If I'm lying, then you have nothing to worry about, I said calmly, which I could tell infuriated her even more. Get tested. Prove me wrong. I'll wait. David said you're crazy. He said you've been having mental problems. He said you're obsessed with him and can't let go. Of course he did, and yet I have test results from a licensed physician. What do you have? His word. The word of a man who lied to his wife for months while fucking you behind her back. I paused, letting that sink in. Think about it, Jessica. If he'll cheat with you, he'll cheat on you. If he'll lie to me, he'll lie to you. But sure, keep trusting him. I'm sure it'll work out great. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline. That felt good. That felt really, really good. For the first time in weeks, I felt powerful instead of powerless. I felt like I had control over something. I couldn't control David's affair, couldn't undo the betrayal, couldn't erase the humiliation. But I could make sure they both faced consequences for what they'd done. Over the next 2 days, I became someone I didn't recognize. I threw myself into research and planning with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. If I was going to destroy David's life, I was going to do it right. I was going to be thorough, methodical, strategic. I made lists, actual lists, written in a notebook I kept hidden in my nightstand. People who deserved to know the truth about David, evidence I still needed to gather, moves I could make to maximize damage. It sounds cold when I say it like that, I know. It sounds calculating and cruel. But I didn't feel cruel. I felt focused, determined, like I'd finally found a purpose after months of drifting through a marriage that was already dead. First on my list, David's parents. Robert and Catherine Mitchell, the perfect upper-middle-class couple who'd always been so proud of their successful son. They'd welcomed me into their family with warmth and affection, treated me like a daughter. They deserved to know what kind of man their son really was. Second, David's boss. Henderson and Associates had a strict ethics policy. I'd heard David mention it before, usually complaining about how uptight the company was about personal conduct. Apparently affairs, especially with partners from client companies, were grounds for termination. Jessica worked at Radiance Marketing, one of Henderson and Associates' biggest clients. This wasn't just an affair. It was a conflict of interest. Third, our mutual friends. The couples we'd had dinner with, hosted at our house, vacationed with. They thought David was a great guy, a devoted husband. They needed to know the truth. Fourth, my family. Emma deserved an apology and an explanation. My parents deserved to know why their daughter's marriage was ending. But I needed more evidence first. The emails and phone records were good, but I needed something undeniable. Something that would make it impossible for David to spin the narrative, to paint me as the crazy ex-wife. That's when I remembered something, David's obsession with documenting everything. He took photos constantly, saved every receipt, kept meticulous records of everything he did. He said it was for tax purposes, for expense reports, for insurance. But I knew it was more than that. David liked having proof of his life, evidence of his success, documentation of his experiences. If he'd been carrying on an affair for months, he'd have documented it somehow. More photos than just what I'd seen in emails, more evidence than just receipts. His laptop was still password protected, but I was in his email now. I could access his cloud storage using the same account. It took me 20 minutes of trying different combinations before I got in. And what I found there made my jaw drop. Hundreds of photos, videos, screenshots of conversations. David had documented his entire affair in obsessive detail, probably never imagining anyone would see it. There were intimate photos of Jessica, photos of them together, videos of them in hotel rooms, screenshots of their text conversations, including ones where they explicitly discussed the affair, where Jessica asked if his wife suspected anything, where David called me clueless and boring. There were photos from the weekend Emma had seen him at Russo's. Proof that he'd lied about being in Chicago, proof that he'd fabricated the conference evidence somehow. There were receipts from expensive gifts he'd bought Jessica, jewelry and designer bags and weekend trips, all charged to credit cards I didn't know existed. The more I looked, the angrier I got. The more evidence I found, the more my determination hardened into something unbreakable. David had been living a double life for at least 6 months, maybe longer. He'd been spending money we didn't have on another woman. He'd been lying about every business trip, every late night at work, every weekend conference. Our entire marriage had been a sham for months, and I'd been too trusting, too naive, too devoted to see it. I downloaded everything. Every photo, every video, every screenshot. I created backups on 3 different drives, uploaded copies to my own cloud storage. This was insurance. This was ammunition. This was everything I needed to make sure the truth came out. Then I started writing. A document that laid out everything in chronological order. A timeline of David's affair with evidence for each entry. Dates, locations, receipts, photos, an undeniable record of his betrayal. It took me all of Monday night and most of Tuesday. I called in sick to work, something I never did, and spent the entire day at my dining room table with my laptop, building my case like a prosecutor preparing for trial. By Tuesday evening, I had a 40-page document with embedded photos and screenshots, a comprehensive record of David's infidelity. It was thorough, damning, and absolutely irrefutable. Now, I just needed to decide how to use it. Wednesday morning, I got an email from Jessica. Short, curt, clearly written through gritted teeth. I got tested. I'm waiting for results. If you're lying about this, I'll sue you for harassment. I smiled at my laptop screen. She'd actually done it. She'd gone to a doctor, which meant she was starting to doubt David, starting to wonder if I was telling the truth. I didn't respond. Silence would torture her more than any reply I could write. That afternoon, I called Emma. My hands were shaking as I dialed her number, years of guilt and regret making my throat tight. She answered on the second ring. "Sarah!" Her voice was cautious, hopeful, worried all at once. "Emma," I said, and my voice broke. "I'm so sorry. You were right about everything. I should have listened to you. I should have believed you. I'm so sorry." There was a pause, and then I heard her voice thick with tears. "Oh, Sarah, what happened?" I told her everything. The symptoms, the test results, the confrontation with David, the coffee shop humiliation, the evidence I'd found, the revenge I was planning. It all poured out of me in a rush, words tumbling over each other, years of pain and secrets finally released. Emma listened without interrupting, letting me purge it all. When I finally finished, drained and exhausted, she was quiet for a long moment. "I'm coming over," she said finally. "Right now, you shouldn't be dealing with this alone." "Emma, you don't have to." "I'm your sister. You're hurting. I'm coming over. We'll figure this out together." She showed up 40 minutes later with Thai takeout and a bottle of wine. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd confronted David with the test results, and I showed her everything. The emails, the photos, the timeline I'd created. She looked at it all with an expression that cycled through shock, disgust, and fury. "He's such a piece of shit," she said finally, shaking her head. "Sarah, I knew he was bad, but this is sociopathic." "I trusted him," I said, tears falling again. "I defended him to you, to everyone. I let him make me feel crazy for questioning him." Emma reached across the table and gripped my hand. "This is not your fault. None of this is your fault. He lied. He cheated. He gaslit you. That's all on him." I should have seen it. He didn't want you to see it. Men like David, they're expert manipulators. They know exactly how to keep you off balance, how to make you doubt yourself. She squeezed my hand harder. "But you see it now, and you have all this evidence, so what are you going to do with it?" I looked at my sister, this woman who tried to protect me and I'd pushed away, and I felt something settle in my chest. Resolve, determination. "I'm going to burn his life to the ground," I said. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who he is. His parents, his boss, our friends, everyone. He humiliated me in public, so I'm going to return the favor." Emma's lips curved into a fierce smile. "Good. What do you need me to do?" Having Emma on my side changed everything. She helped me refine my plan, pointed out angles I hadn't considered, asked questions that made me think more strategically. Together, we created a step-by-step strategy for maximum impact. Step 1, wait for Jessica's test results. If they came back positive, that was extra ammunition. If they came back negative, I'd work with what I had. Step 2, contact David's parents. They deserved to hear it from me first, before David could spin the story. Step 3, send the evidence to David's boss. Let Henderson and Associates decide whether having an affair with a client company employee violated their ethics policy. Step 4, inform our mutual friends. Not with drama or emotion, just facts and evidence. Step 5, post the truth on social media. Let everyone see who David really was. "Are you sure about step 5? Emma asked. "That's pretty nuclear. Once you put it out there, you can't take it back." I'm sure, I said. He mocked me publicly. He brought his mistress to humiliate me. Everyone deserves to know the truth. On Thursday, I got another email from Jessica. This one was different. Longer. Angrier, but the anger was directed at a different target now. My test came back positive. Positive, I have fucking chlamydia. David swore to me he got tested. He swore he was clean. He lied. He gave this to me and didn't tell me. I've been having symptoms for WEKS and he kept saying it was nothing, that I was overreacting. He knew. He fucking knew and he didn't tell me. I could have complications. The doctor said if I'd waited much longer, I could have developed PID. I could have become infertile because your asshole husband couldn't be honest about having an STD. I read the email twice and I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction exactly, not happiness at her pain, but a grim sense of justice. She'd participated in destroying my marriage, she'd laughed at my suffering, and now she was experiencing a fraction of what I'd gone through. I wrote back, and this time my tone was almost gentle. Jessica, I'm sorry you're going through this. I really am. No one deserves to be lied to about their health. David did the same thing to me, and I know how scary and violating it feels. My advice, get away from him. He's lied to both of us, manipulated both of us, put both our health at risk. Whatever he's told you about me, about why our marriage ended, it's probably a lie. He's really good at lying. Her response came quickly. I broke up with him, or tried to. He's been calling and texting nonstop, saying you must have given it to him, that you're the one who cheated. But I don't believe him anymore. I looked at the timeline. You couldn't have given it to him. The timing doesn't work. He gave it to both of us. He's a liar and I'm done. Then she sent another email, and this one included an attachment. I thought you might want these, evidence, in case you need it for the divorce. I opened the attachment and felt my eyebrows rise. Jessica had sent me screenshots of text conversations between her and David. Dozens of them. Messages where he talked about how he was going to divorce me, how he was just waiting for the right time, how I'd never find out about the affair. Messages where he called me terrible names, mocked my appearance, complained about having to pretend to still care about me. There were also screenshots of Venmo payments David had sent her. Rent money, apparently. He'd been helping pay for her apartment, with money from our joint bank account, money I'd contributed to, thinking it was going toward our household expenses. Jessica had given me everything, every piece of evidence she had, and I understood why. She'd been betrayed too, she'd been lied to too, and she wanted him to pay for it just as much as I did. Thank you, I wrote back. I know things between us started badly and I know you probably hate me, but thank you for this. It helps more than you know. I don't hate you, she replied. I was terrible to you. I knew he was married and I didn't care. I thought I was special, that what we had was different, that he actually loved me. But he doesn't love anyone except himself. I'm sorry for what I did to your marriage. You didn't deserve that. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. And I certainly didn't think we were going to become friends. But it was acknowledgement, accountability, something David had never given either of us. With Jessica's evidence added to everything else I had, my case was airtight, unassailable. David couldn't lie his way out of this, couldn't manipulate or gaslight or spin the narrative. Friday morning, I made the first call. To Catherine and Robert Mitchell, David's parents. Catherine answered, her voice warm and welcoming like always. Sarah, what a lovely surprise. How are you, dear? Catherine, I need to tell you something. About David and me, about our marriage. I took a deep breath. Is Robert there? I'd like to tell you both at the same time. There was a pause, and I heard the concern creep into her voice. Of course. Let me put you on speaker. Robert, come here, it's Sarah. I heard shuffling, Robert's voice greeting me, and then silence as they waited for me to speak. I told them everything. The affair, the lies, the STD, the humiliation in the coffee shop. I kept my voice calm and factual, didn't editorialize or dramatize, just laid out the facts. The silence when I finished was deafening. Finally, Robert spoke, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah, are you certain about this? David said. He told us you two were having some problems, but he made it sound like you were the one who wanted the divorce. I have evidence, I said quietly. Emails, text messages, photos, phone records, credit card statements, test results. If you want to see it, I can send it to you. I understand if you don't believe me. He's your son, but I'm telling you the truth. Send it, Catherine said, and her voice was hard in a way I'd never heard before. Send us everything. I did. I sent them the entire 40-page document, every piece of evidence, everything. And then I waited. 2 hours later, Catherine called me back. She was crying. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. We had no idea he was capable of this. It's not your fault, I said, and I meant it. You didn't do this, he did. We raised him better than this, she sobbed. How could he do this to you, to his marriage? How could he lie to us? I don't know, I said honestly. I've been asking myself the same questions. Robert is devastated. He wants to talk to David, but I told him to wait. We need to process this first. She paused. Sarah, if you need anything at all, please call us. You're still family to us no matter what David did. We love you. I hung up feeling lighter somehow. David's parents believed me. They'd seen the evidence and they'd chosen to support me rather than blindly defend their son. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. Next, I drafted an email to HR at Henderson and Associates. Professional, factual, with just enough evidence attached to make my point. To whom it may concern, I am writing to inform you of a situation involving one of your employees, David Mitchell, that may violate company ethics policies. Mr. Mitchell, my soon-to-be ex-husband, has been carrying on an affair with Jessica Morrison, an employee of Radiance Marketing Solutions, one of your client companies. I have extensive evidence of this affair, including emails sent from Mr. Mitchell's company email address, photos taken during work trips, and expense reports that may have been falsified to hide the relationship. I understand Henderson and Associates has strict policies regarding relationships with client company employees. I thought you should be aware of this situation. I attached a selection of the most damning evidence, carefully chosen to show both the affair and the professional conflict of interest. Then I sent it before I could second-guess myself. That was it. The grenade was thrown. Now I just had to wait for the explosion. The explosion came faster than I expected. By Friday evening, my phone started ringing. David, calling over and over. I didn't answer. Let it go to voicemail. I listened to the messages later, and they were a progression of panic. First message. Sarah, what the fuck did you do? My parents called me screaming. What did you tell them? Second message. You sent them lies. You're trying to turn my family against me. This is harassment. Third message. My boss wants to see me Monday morning. What did you do? What did you send them? Fourth message. You fucking bitch, you're trying to destroy my life. You can't do this. I'll sue you for defamation. Fifth message. Sarah, please call me back. We can work this out. Just tell me what you want, please. I listened to all of them with no emotion, just cold satisfaction. He was panicking. Good, he should panic. Saturday morning, I composed one long message to our entire friend group. A group text that included every couple we knew, every person who'd celebrated our wedding, everyone who thought we were happy. Hi everyone. I wanted to reach out personally before you hear it from someone else. David and I are getting divorced. The reason is that he's been having an affair for at least 6 months with a woman named Jessica Morrison. I found out when I contracted chlamydia from him and had to get tested. When I confronted him, he denied everything and tried to make me think I was crazy. I have extensive evidence of the affair if anyone doubts this. I'm telling you all because I want you to know the truth before David tries to spin another story. I'm sorry to involve you in our personal issues, but I think you all deserve to know who he really is. I sent it and immediately turned off my phone. I didn't want to see the responses yet. Didn't want to deal with the questions and shock and drama. I just wanted them to know. Sunday morning, I did the thing I'd been most nervous about. I posted on Facebook, the first post I'd made in months. I didn't make it dramatic or emotional. I kept it simple and factual. After 8 years of marriage, I'm filing for divorce from David Mitchell. The reason is his 6-month affair with Jessica Morrison of Radiance Marketing Solutions. I'm posting this publicly because David has been telling people that I'm mentally unstable and making up stories. I have extensive evidence including emails, text messages, photos, phone records, and medical test results showing he gave me chlamydia. I'm sharing this not for sympathy, but for truth. Everyone who knows us deserves to know the real reason our marriage ended. I'm happy to provide evidence to anyone who wants it. Then I tagged David, tagged Jessica, tagged everyone who needed to see it. And I posted it. Within an hour, my phone was flooded with notifications. Comments, messages, friend requests from people I hadn't talked to in years. I turned my phone on silent and stepped away from it. Emma came over that afternoon, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug. "You did it," she said. "You actually did it." "I did," I agreed, and I started crying. Not sad tears, release tears, relief tears. I can't believe I actually did that. "How do you feel?" I thought about it. Terrified, exhilarated, free, all of it at once. We spent the rest of Sunday drinking wine and watching mindless TV, my phone still on silent, the notifications still pouring in. I wasn't ready to look yet, wasn't ready to see the fallout. Monday morning, I finally looked at my phone. Over 300 notifications. Comments on my Facebook post ranged from supportive to shocked to angry on my behalf. Friends I hadn't talked to in years were messaging me with support. Some were sharing my post, spreading it further than I'd ever imagined. Several people had commented saying they'd always known something was off about David. Others shared their own stories of betrayal and infidelity. Women I barely knew were thanking me for my bravery in speaking out. There were negative comments, too. A few of David's work friends defending him, saying I must be lying, that this was a vindictive ex-wife making up stories. But they were drowned out by the overwhelming support. Jessica's social media had been deleted. Her Instagram, Facebook, everything was gone. She'd scrubbed her online presence completely, probably overwhelmed by the backlash. David's social media was still up, but he'd disabled comments. His last post, the one from months ago showing him at some corporate event, had hundreds of new comments calling him out, people who'd seen my post demanding answers. But the real explosion happened at Henderson and Associates. Monday afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Sarah Mitchell?" "Yes." "This is Gregory Chen. I'm the director of HR at Henderson and Associates. I'm calling regarding the information you sent us about David Mitchell." My heart started pounding. "Yes. We've conducted a preliminary investigation based on your evidence. I want to thank you for bringing this to our attention. The relationship between Mr. Mitchell and Ms. Morrison does indeed violate our ethics policies. Mr. Mitchell has been terminated, effective immediately." I sat down hard on my couch. He was fired. Yes, the conflict of interest, combined with evidence that he may have falsified expense reports to hide the relationship, constitutes grounds for immediate termination. Additionally, we've severed our contract with Radiance Marketing Solutions pending their investigation into Ms. Morrison's conduct. David had been fired, lost his job. The career he'd prioritized over our marriage, the work he'd claimed was so important he had to miss dinners and weekends and our actual life together, was gone. Thank you for telling me," I managed. "Ms. Mitchell, I want to apologize on behalf of the company. If we'd known this was happening, we would have intervened sooner. I'm very sorry for what you've been through." After I hung up, I just sat there in stunned silence. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. David's life was imploding, and it was all because of the evidence I'd gathered, the truth I'd revealed, the courage I'd found to fight back. My phone rang again. This time it was Catherine, David's mother. "Sarah, I thought you should know. We told David not to contact us until he's ready to take full responsibility for what he's done. We're not going to enable his behavior or let him play the victim." "How is he?" I asked, not because I cared, but because it seemed like the thing to ask. "Honestly, he's a mess. He lost his job today. Jessica broke up with him. His friends are disgusted with him. He tried to tell us you were lying, that you made everything up, but we saw the evidence. We know the truth." She paused. "He's staying at some extended stay hotel now. Apparently, Jessica kicked him out of her apartment when she found out about the chlamydia. So he'd lost everything. His wife, his mistress, his job, his parents' support, his home, his reputation. Everything he'd risked our marriage for was gone." "Robert wants to know if you need help with anything," Catherine continued. "Money for a lawyer, a place to stay, anything. We feel partially responsible. We raised him, and somehow we missed that he could be this cruel." "You're not responsible," I said firmly. "And I'm okay. I have a good lawyer, I have my job, I have my sister, I'll be fine." "You're a strong woman, Sarah. Stronger than David ever deserved." Over the next few days, I watched the ripples spread. Friends reached out with support. My principal called to check on me, said she'd heard what happened and wanted to make sure I was okay. My students' parents, some of whom had heard through the grapevine, sent messages of support. The divorce proceedings moved forward quickly. David's lawyer tried to argue for a contested divorce, tried to claim I was entitled to nothing because I'd destroyed his reputation. My lawyer shut that down immediately, pointed out that David had destroyed his own reputation by having an affair and giving his wife an STD. With all the evidence I had, David's lawyer advised him to agree to an uncontested divorce. We split our assets 50-50, though I kept the house since I could afford the mortgage on my teacher's salary, and David no longer had steady income. He took his car, his clothes, and his damaged reputation. The whole process took 3 months. 3 months of paperwork and lawyers, and dividing up a life we'd built together. 3 months of processing everything that had happened, everything I'd lost, everything I'd learned about myself. Jessica reached out one more time, about a month after everything went public. A short email. "I wanted you to know that Radiance Marketing fired me. They said my relationship with David reflected poorly on the company and damaged their reputation with a major client. I lost my job because of him, because I was stupid enough to believe his lies. I'm moving back to my hometown, starting over. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. You were right about him, about all of it." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences, just like David, just like all of us. 3 months after that coffee shop humiliation, my divorce was final. Sarah Mitchell became Sarah Parker again. I got my name back, my freedom back, my life back. But more than that, I got myself back. The strong, confident woman who'd existed before David had slowly eroded her self-worth. The woman who trusted her instincts. The woman who wouldn't accept lies or gaslighting or manipulation. David tried to call a few times in those months. Left voicemails apologizing, claiming he never meant to hurt me, saying he'd made terrible mistakes. I never called back. There was nothing he could say that would change anything. Nothing he could do to undo the damage he'd caused. I heard through mutual friends that he eventually found another job, though not in finance. Something in sales with a significant pay cut. He moved to another city, apparently unable to handle living somewhere everyone knew what he'd done. Good, let him start over somewhere else. Let him live with the consequences of his choices. As for me, I started over too, but not somewhere else. Right here in the city I loved, in the house I'd fought to keep, in the job that had sustained me through the worst of it. I reconnected with Emma, rebuilt our relationship into something even stronger than before. She'd stood by me through everything, helped me find my strength, never once said, "I told you so," even though she'd earned the right. I made new friends, women who were drawn to my honesty about what I'd been through. Started a support group for women dealing with infidelity, a safe space to share stories and strategies and strength. I dated eventually, though I was cautious. Careful. I'd learned the hard way to trust my instincts, to pay attention to red flags, to never make myself smaller for someone else's comfort. And I taught. Continued showing up for my third graders every day, pouring my energy into helping them learn and grow. They didn't know what their teacher had been through, didn't know about the battle I'd fought and won. They just knew Ms. Parker was someone who cared about them, who showed up, who kept her promises. Unlike some people. Looking back now, 6 months after that day in Dr. Martinez's office when I learned the truth, I can see how much I've changed, how much I've grown. The old Sarah would have suffered in silence, accepted the betrayal, maybe even blamed herself for not being enough. The new Sarah burned it all down and rose from the ashes. And I don't regret a single thing I did, not the emails to Jessica, not telling David's parents, not sending evidence to his workplace, not posting the truth publicly. David made his choices. I just made sure he faced the consequences. He wanted to humiliate me, to make me feel small and worthless and pathetic. He wanted to have his affair and his marriage too, to eat his cake and mine. Instead, he lost everything, and I gained myself. That seems like a fair trade to me. People ask me sometimes if I'm bitter, if I'm angry, if I hate David for what he did. The truth is, I don't feel much of anything for him anymore. Not love, not hate, just nothing, indifference. He's a character in a story about who I used to be, not someone who has any power over who I am now. The anger I felt, that white-hot rage that drove me to expose him, that's gone too. It served its purpose. It gave me the energy to fight back, to refuse to be a victim. But I don't need it anymore. What I have now is peace. Hard-won, earned through pain and betrayal and ultimately choosing myself. Peace with being alone. Peace with my choices. Peace with my future, whatever it holds. And if there's one thing I want everyone who hears this story to understand, it's this. You are not what someone else did to you. You are how you respond to it. You are the choices you make when everything falls apart. David tried to destroy me. Instead, he freed me. And that, more than any revenge I took, is the real victory. The first morning I woke up after the divorce was finalized felt different. I remember it so clearly. It was a Tuesday in early June, sunlight streaming through my bedroom window, birds singing outside like they were celebrating something. I opened my eyes and lay there for a moment, just breathing, just being. And I realized something profound. I was alone in my bed, alone in my house, alone in my life. And for the first time in months, maybe years, that didn't feel like a tragedy. It felt like possibility. I got up slowly, stretched, felt the morning air on my skin, walked to my kitchen and made coffee just the way I liked it, strong with a little cream, no sugar. I didn't have to make it the way David liked it. Didn't have to adjust my preferences to accommodate someone else. It was such a small thing, such a tiny detail, but it felt monumental. I took my coffee out to my back porch and sat in the morning quiet, watching the sun rise higher, listening to the neighborhood wake up around me. And I thought about everything that had happened, everything I'd been through, everything I'd survived. 6 months ago, I'd been standing in a hospital corridor with test results that shattered my world. I'd been devastated, broken, convinced my life was over. I'd felt like a victim of circumstances beyond my control, like a woman whose husband had destroyed her. But sitting there on my porch with my coffee, watching a new day begin, I understood something I hadn't been able to see when I was in the middle of the pain. David hadn't destroyed me. He destroyed the illusion of who I thought I was, the fantasy of what I thought my life was supposed to be. And in doing so, he'd actually freed me to become who I was meant to be all along. The woman I was before David, before the marriage, before all of it, she'd been strong, independent, confident. She'd known her worth. She'd had dreams and ambitions and a sense of self that didn't require validation from anyone else. Somewhere in the 8 years of being Mrs. Mitchell, I'd lost her. I'd made myself smaller to make room for David's ego. I'd silenced my own voice to avoid conflict. I'd ignored my instincts to keep the peace. I'd become a supporting character in someone else's story instead of the protagonist of my own. But that woman, the real Sarah, she'd never actually gone away. She'd just been buried under layers of compromise and accommodation and learned helplessness. And when everything fell apart, when I had nothing left to lose, she came roaring back. The woman who'd gathered evidence and exposed David's affair wasn't someone new. She was me, the real me, finally done with pretending to be small. I finished my coffee and went inside to get ready for work. It was the last week of school before summer break, and my students were excited and restless and full of end-of-year energy. I'd missed several days during the worst of the divorce proceedings, and I could see they'd noticed something was different about me when I came back. "Ms. Parker, you seem happier," Sophie, the perceptive little girl who'd noticed my exhaustion months ago, told me one day. "Did something good happen?" I smiled at her, this 8-year-old with wisdom beyond her years. "Something hard happened," I said honestly, "but I'm learning that sometimes hard things can lead to good things. Does that make sense?" She nodded solemnly. "Like when I broke my arm and had to get a cast, but then everyone signed it and I made new friends." "Exactly like that," I said, touched by her ability to find meaning in difficulty.